Rain traced thin silver lines down the apartment window, blurring the city into soft halos of light. Mia Langford curled up on the sofa with a warm cup of tea, the glow of her laptop splashing blue across the quiet room. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Coldplay was live, and she'd saved this one small joy for herself. Adrian had texted hours earlier. "Late meeting. Don't wait up." He was the kind of CEO the business magazines loved, fluent in numbers, fluent in charm. Mia read the message once, then let it fade into the background. Like so many of his work nights, the stream opened on a sea of wristbands and color. The camera swept through the stadium, while the crowd roared to the first chords. Mia smiled without thinking. She'd loved this band since college. Lyrics had gotten her through cheap coffee, late deadlines, and the kind of exhaustion that only ambition understands. She turned up the volume. Let the music fill the spaces that had gone too quiet lately. Between songs, the broadcast drifted over faces in the stands, dancing couples, homemade signs, a girl crying happy tears under a plastic poncho. Mia laughed softly into her mug. For a moment, she could almost feel the stadium beneath her feet, the bass thrumming like a second heartbeat. Then the camera paused on a VIP box. Warm gold lighting, the slope of a leather armrest. A man in a tailored dark suit turned slightly, just enough for the profile to land like a strike. Adrian. Mia leaned forward before her mind caught up. Maybe a look-alike, maybe a glitch, but the camera settled, steady as a breath held. The woman beside him, crimson dress, easy laugh, tilted her head to his shoulder. They looked comfortable, familiar. The kind of familiar you don't have to explain. The crowd shouted for the next song. On the screen, Adrian leaned in and kissed her. Not a quick camera-shy brush. Slow, sure, unmistakable. Something in the room snapped into silence. The music thinned to a distant hum. Mia's fingers tightened around the cup until the ceramic pressed a mark into her skin. Her phone buzzed once on the table. Then again. Then it wouldn't stop. "Mia, are you seeing this? Is that Adrian? I'm so sorry." "Stay strong." Screenshots appeared online faster than she could blink. Hashtags ignited in the chat. The stream didn't cut away. It didn't have to. The picture had done its work. Her private life became a headline without a word spoken. Mia stared at the laptop as if the image might reverse itself. The apartment seemed smaller now, the walls closer. She could hear the rain deepen, tapping the glass like an impatient hand. And now a question for you watching this story. If the whole world witnessed your most painful moment, what would give you the strength to keep going? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the hope someone needs tonight. Her phone rattled again, jittering across the table. Group chats, co-workers, an aunt she hadn't spoken to in months. The same clip, the same angle, the same gold light. She stood slowly, the tea untouched, and crossed to the window. The city kept moving, traffic threading red and white down wet streets, umbrellas blooming at crosswalks. Out there the night had no idea her world had tilted. Adrian's last text hovered in her mind, suddenly childish in its simplicity. "Late meeting," she almost laughed, then didn't. In the reflection, she caught her own face, pale, eyes wide, and something else behind the shock. A small, steady flicker that refused to go out. She opened the laptop again. The song had changed. The stadium sang as one, thousands of voices rising to a chorus about fixing what breaks. Ironic, she thought, or maybe prophetic. She didn't know yet. She only knew the truth had arrived, uninvited and undeniable, and there was no returning it to the envelope. Mia closed the stream with a firm click. The apartment took a breath. The rain carried on. Her phone continued to buzz, but she let it. She needed a moment with the quiet, just long enough to decide that this night, however public, would not be the final line of her story. Some endings announce themselves with fireworks. Others come as a clean, bright cut. This one appeared on a broadcast watched by strangers. And yet, beneath the humiliation and the noise, Mia felt the faintest outline of a beginning. Not pretty, not planned, but a beginning all the same. Outside, a siren threaded the distance. Inside, she set the cup down, wiped a circle of condensation from the table, and drew a breath that reached the bottom of her lungs. Whatever came next, questions, calls, the relentless parade of opinions, she would meet it. Not because she was ready, but because there was no other honest choice. The camera had given the world a story. She would give herself a different ending. From a distance, Mia Langford's life looked perfectly composed. A framed picture hung straight on the wall, the colors balanced, the smile right where it belonged. People watched her glide through glass-walled receptions, in a dress that fit like a breath and assumed everything behind that polished surface was steady. For a time, Mia tried to believe that too. She hadn't been born into any of this. She grew up on narrow streets where the afternoon smelled like warm bread and the buses coughed at the intersections. Her mother, a librarian who loved order, taught her that reading is a kind of travel. Her father, an electronics technician with a patient touch, taught her that small parts can hold an entire world together. As a child, she sat on the floor with books too heavy for her arms, underlining sentences and whispering them like small spells. Evenings hummed with the soft static of the radio and the kettle's low murmur. Questions were welcome at the table, even the wild ones, especially the wild ones. At school she preferred graph paper. Boxes calmed her. She liked ideas that could be arranged, stacked, color-coded. Design arrived as a quiet calling, first in the margins of notebooks, then on the covers of school projects. At 17, she designed posters for a community fair. At 19, a cafe asked her to redo their menu. She saw how ink on paper could make a stranger pause, how shape and spacing could turn a decision into a feeling. She fell in love with that kind of influence, the kind that didn't shout. Only invited university came on a partial scholarship and a promise to herself. If she couldn't outspend anyone, she would outlearn them. She waited tables on weekends, laid out student magazines at night, and drank coffee like courage. When she graduated, a digital marketing agency hired her to design for startups. The salary was thin, but the briefs were wide open. Make something that doesn't exist yet. Those words lit up the inside of her chest. 3 years before the concert, Adrian Cole's name started floating through the office like a rumor wearing cologne. He wasn't just promising. He was the poster boy of a growth cycle everyone wanted a slice of. Clips of him on stage traveled like music videos. Quick lines, sharp cuts, the certainty of someone who had already circled what he wanted on a map. When Mia's agency was invited to present at an innovation conference, Adrian as keynote, the group chat buzzed until 2 a.m. Mia was tapped to present a usability case. She tuned animations until they breathed, arranged micro-interactions as if they were notes in a song most people wouldn't consciously hear but would feel. Trust is born in the details, she kept telling herself. On the day, she wore a plain black dress and a simple knot in her hair. The auditorium ran too cold. The lights felt like questions. She spoke anyway, steady as a metronome. Her slides were less a performance than a conversation. When she finished, the applause wasn't loud. It lingered. That kind of applause means you've been understood. He found her by the coffee urn. Your system's eye is rare, he said. Not beautiful. Not charming, rare. The word unlocked something. They spoke for 12 minutes about friction, dark palettes, ethics. He tilted his head when he listened, as if making space for her words to sit. He handed her a card. That night he sent the first message. The beginning was a slow sweetness. Morning texts with a joke. Phone calls that started with 2 minutes and ended an hour later. Coffee in places where the barista knew his name and said hello to her as if she had always been there. Dinner at a restaurant where the chef, nervous and proud, explained the menu like a short story. Mia felt slightly out of place and strangely at home. She asked questions that weren't on cue cards. He seemed relieved to answer like a person instead of a headline. Trips arrived like postcards that could breathe. A winter beach where she traced invisible constellations in the fogged window while he drove in comfortable silence. A small town where the streets were narrow and the shadows made patterns on old walls, patterns she later turned into a branding study. "With you, even corners become a lab," he texted. She saved the message and read it again on a day that wasn't easy. Gifts came next. Not extravagant at first, thoughtful. A book on typography she'd mentioned once. A pen that moved, like it knew the direction without her hand. Earrings that matched a night he introduced her to the noisier side of his world. She thanked him, and she kept buying her own small things at the end of the month. That balance felt important, even if she couldn't have said why. Moving in together arrived as a sequence, not a spectacle. The apartment had windows that made the morning sound like water. She lined her notebooks by color, shelved the books by theme, and set a single empty mug on the sill, as if it could hold the light. Couple life was a puzzle of ordinary pieces. Learning his coffee, nearly burned, learning her tea, nearly sweet, grocery lists, small arguments about the right drawer for the knives. He made eggs with scientific precision. She taped tiny hand-drawn notes to the refrigerator. It felt like a gentle choreography. It felt like enough. Cracks arrived thin as hair. A cancelled dinner with her parents because the board called an urgent session. A postponed visit to a friend's newborn because we're expected at this event. Mia didn't want to keep score. She told herself love and ambition were not enemies. She had her own deadlines and the sweet ache of chasing a clean idea. They were, she liked to say, two people who loved the work of making things, but there were differences she couldn't name without sounding petty to herself. When she talked about her studio, the small, bright space with plants and paper and a sign on the door with her own name, he smiled with a later he carried like a spare key. When things stabilize, we'll see, later became a room with no door. At dinners, he started telling their story in a way that positioned her as a department. Mia's brilliant with visuals. She helps refine the company's image. It sounded like praise. It made her feel like a tool. At a gala, an investor said, "It's good when the partner buys the leader's vision." Mia laughed politely and learned the price of that sentence was an hour of not trusting her own breathing. That night, awake in the blue of the bedroom, she wrote in her notebook, "I don't buy. I build." The apartment changed its quiet. Not the good hush of two people reading, a chill. The sound of a phone face down on wood. The phrase "one quick call" that took 40 minutes and an entire hallway. The way his eyes slid back to the screen before hers had finished a sentence. Some nights found her on the edge of the bed, counting the lines in the ceiling because numbers still made sense. Friends noticed the way busy people do. In passing, between sips, between posts. At birthdays, they arrived in polished light. A picture the room wanted to keep. "You're perfect together," someone said, pouring champagne over the words. Mia smiled. She thought, things look perfect when you choose a single angle. At home, she put away her shoes like a ceremony, paired earrings as if they were promises, washed her face with cold water until it stung. Order was a blanket she spread over the parts she didn't understand. She tried to make noise that would carry. "Let's escape for a day." Dinner, just us, no phones. Listen to what happened at the agency. It worked for 10 minutes, sometimes 20. Then the creature of his work, always hungry, called him back. Just a second. Mia began measuring love in minutes of undivided attention. Work loved her back, at least. She was trusted with bigger accounts, braver briefs. She mapped her future like a patient cartographer. Small clients, large freedom, projects with a reason to exist. She built a spreadsheet where grey lines contained the cost of light. She showed it to her father one Sunday. He tapped the page with a proud finger. "You've always known how to build." She showed it to Adrian and received a kiss on the forehead, a soft "not now," and a frame for later. "I'm closing around." "Then time will open. Then we can plan your studio properly." Then kept moving like a horizon. Something in her slipped. The most dangerous silence, she learned, often wears the costume of planning. There were good days that made the calendar glow. A rainy Saturday cooking to a slow playlist. A Sunday morning when he brought flowers and didn't check his phone until noon. A short trip to a village where they read on the same bench without speaking and called it intimacy. Those days kept her. "It isn't black and white," she told her best friend. "There are blue days." "Is that sky his?" the friend texted back, "or yours?" Events turned into a small theater. Hand-in-hand cameras, a learned walk. She once tried to talk with an executive about accessibility. Her sentence was interrupted by a toast. "Later," Adrian said over her shoulder, and later never arrived. In the car home, she thought of the poster she'd designed at 17 for a community fair where no one had to be introduced to matter. The boundary lines blurred. Lunch with friends became better next week. A visit to her parents after this sprint. A park on Sunday. When the market rotation allows. A phrase so absurd she wrote it down because it felt like a joke the world was playing on them. Mia realized she was postponing herself. The bank account held steady. The closet looked like a magazine. The calendar was beautiful. She felt thin at the edges, and still she believed in us. He said things that kept a small flame alive. "You remind me why any of this matters. With you, I'd rest. If I could stop the world, I would stop it right here." She kept those lines like matches in a drawer for a night she hadn't named yet. Then came the first real argument. Not loud, sharp. She asked him not to post an image from a charity event that included a private moment she didn't want online. He called it a harmless brand story. She said her life wasn't a brand. He called in the PR team to align narratives. She stepped out to breathe and made tea with shaking hands. The next day, the post went up with a caption about resilience. She felt oddly erased by a picture with her own face in it. Another small fracture. A stylist arrived one afternoon to help streamline your look for the calendar. Clothes were beautiful, but something in the phrasing curled like paper near a flame. Streamline your look for the calendar. She smiled and said thank you and tried not to lose the sound of her own voice. He suggested an NDA just to avoid press leaks. And she signed because she wanted to be reasonable. She trusted his reasons until she realized how the document felt in her hand. A thin weight that somehow measured the distance between love and management. She kept a copy in a folder with her passport and her diploma. The three together looked like a riddle. There were conversations she tried to start and couldn't finish. "Sometimes I miss the older version of us." "We're still here," he said, and touched her head like a blessing. Once she said, "I need a night that belongs to us." He said, "Everything belongs to us." That's the point, but the phone lit up. He stepped into the hall. The hall learned more of their life than she did. She went to a therapist twice and stopped. Not because it wasn't helping, but because the waiting room smelled like a kind of surrender she wasn't ready to name. She returned instead to the notebooks, The graph paper, the pencils, the way a straight line can steady a hand. She listed small joys like evidence, the first sip of tea, a message from her mother, a late son on the opposite building, a sentence she'd written that didn't need edits. She kept those pages the way some people keep prayer. Neighbors gave her human scale. A retired music teacher on the 8th floor who carried groceries with fierce pride. A teenager who left his skateboard by the elevator and said sorry with a grin every time the wheels rolled into her ankles. A stray cat that stared from the courtyard wall as if it knew a secret about every tenant. Mia fed it on Tuesday nights and named it Pixel. Small rituals, small anchors, her best friend Lila said over phone one afternoon. "You look like a person holding her breath." Mia smiled at the steam and said, "Maybe I am saving it for the right sentence." Lila eyed her. "Or for the right no." They laughed and didn't finish the soup. The day before the concert, she asked if he wanted to watch it together. Live stream, sweatpants, no rings of people to please. He replied 2 hours later, "Impossible." She stared at the single word until it blurred, then drew a floor plan of the studio she wanted. She added plants to the corners. She drew a long wooden table. She wrote, "Sun from the left in the morning." The page felt like a place she could go. It rained the next day, the kind of rain that makes a city sound like it's breathing. The apartment smelled clean. The window looked like a screen for the clouds. She messaged him, "Good luck," got an emoji back and told herself she wasn't keeping score. She pulled on a soft sweatshirt and twisted her hair into a knot, made tea, set out cookies, opened the laptop. The first notes rolled over the speakers like a tide. She sang under her breath, remembering a bus to class years ago, the same song in her borrowed headphones, the same feeling of a life waiting just around the corner. The camera traveled over the crowd. For a moment she forgot herself and let the image claim her. Lights like constellations, strangers becoming a choir. She thought how deeply human it is to be part of a multitude and still be entirely yourself. Then the camera changed its mind. A golden VIP box filled the frame, a suit she knew by touch, a shoulder that had been home, a face that for years had spelled us without needing to say it. Before that image locked into place, before her phone began to buzz like a trapped bird, before strangers formed opinions about a life they did not live, there had been this, a woman who had done so much right, who studied and worked and loved the slow art of building, who drew lines because lines steadied her, who kept faith in a future because faith held her together when logic did not. There had been a home that became too large for what was shrinking inside. A studio sketched in graphite that was starting to feel less like a dream and more like a map. She could not know. How could anyone? That the cracks she feared were entrances for light. That every later had been preparing a single uncompromising now. That the quiet drawer where she kept matches of kindness and sentences of praise would soon be opened for a different fire. Sometimes life demands that something fall from very high to reveal the ground that was already yours. And when the world saw before she did, when the image leaped from screen to screen faster than breath, Mia felt the drop, then the dark, and at the very edge of it, barely audible, a small flame. It did not say words. It did not promise victory. It only insisted, with the ancient patience of things that rise, that the next chapter had already begun writing her name. The storm of notifications didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like static. One buzz, then another, then a slow, relentless hum that thickened the air of Mia's apartment until it felt like she was breathing through somebody else's screen. The laptop sat shut on the coffee table, slim and useless as a lid placed over a flood. Her phone jittered toward the edge, as if the table itself wanted to be rid of it. She watched the device strobe with previews she refused to open. The first three she let slide past. On the fourth, she saw Lila. "Are you home? Don't look at anything online. I'm coming over." And moments later, "Breathe. I'm bringing food. And a hoodie. You'll hate me for the hoodie, but you'll need it." The rain tapped at the window with the patience of an old drummer. The city's distant sirens softened into a kind of metallic lullaby. Mia flipped the phone, face down, then face up again, because the body hates not knowing. The lock screen flowered into a grid of missed calls, DMs, and headlines, written with the grammar of gossip. "Is that Adrian? Tell me it's not true. I'm so sorry. Don't check Twitter. Don't open Instagram stories. Are you seeing this?" She opened one message against her better judgment and fell straight into a feed already cut, captioned, watermarked, someone else's ownership stamped on her private collapse. There was the VIP box gilded with light. There was Adrian, an outline she had known in the dark. There was the woman in the crimson dress. The camera's slow, merciless zoom. The kiss choreographed by the word inevitable. Below it, comments hissed and crackled. Knives disguised as jokes, pity disguised as kindness, certainty disguised as facts. She closed the app and placed the phone face down with both hands, as if weighing down a small animal that might run. The intercom buzzed. "It's me," Lila said. No hello, no padding, voice steady enough to borrow. Mia pressed the door and listened to the heavy downstairs door open into rain. By the time she unlatched her own, Lila was in the hallway, arms over full. Takeout in warm paper, ginger ale, a grey hoodie so soft it looked like it had a past. Lila's eyes scanned Mia's face with quick tenderness. "Okay," she said, "exhale sharp. We are not doing screens. We are doing tea and chewable things, and the hoodie and whatever version of breathing doesn't hurt." "I already saw," Mia managed. "I saw it while everyone else did." Lila blinked once, absorbing the blow the way good friends learn to, by not looking away. "Then I'm sorry twice," she said, crossing the room to put the food down. "For the thing and for the timing." She pressed the hoodie into Mia's hands. "Put this on. It's like being hugged by a cloud that pays your rent." The laugh that came out of Mia was small and wobbly. She pulled the hoodie over her sweatshirt and felt the cotton calm her skin. Lila opened containers with ritual care. The kitchen light made a warm circle on the counter. Sesame, scallion, steam rising like a gentle argument against the cold. "Do we call him?" Lila asked finally, quietly. The practical question that friendship can't avoid, even when it dreads the answer. "I don't know what I'd say," Mia answered, her throat paper dry. "I don't know what version of him would answer." "Then we don't call him," Lila said. "Not tonight." She set the chopsticks down. "You can decide later if you want a statement, a silence, a scream, or a sonnet." The intercom buzzed again. This time, the panel downstairs displayed a name Mia didn't recognize. When she didn't answer, it buzzed again, insistence practicing to be entitlement. Lila pressed the talk button. "Who is it?" A too cheerful voice said. "I, Stream Pop Media. If Mia wants to share her side—" "No," Lila said, voice flat as a door. "Do not come back." She let the button go like it was hot. "They're not press," she muttered. "They're correlation engines with teeth." By midnight, variations of Adrian's name were trending across platforms Mia hadn't opened. Someone looped the kiss to a Coldplay lyric and called it art. A lifestyle blogger posted a thread about power and humiliation. A gossip account guessed the identity of the woman in crimson, deleted, reposted, sold ad slots between the sentences. Adrian's company issued a no comment that used 31 words to say less than one. At 12:17 a.m., Adrian flashed across her screen. The sound of his name was a muscle memory. Lila raised an eyebrow. After the third ring, Mia answered, because a part of her still believed in finished sentences. "Where are you?" Adrian asked. "Not are you okay?" Not I'm sorry. Not even we need to talk. The question landed like a measuring tape. At home, Mia said. Where I told you I'd be, he exhaled. Not a sigh, not a laugh, something managerial. Listen, he began, words folding into a shape he's practiced. The angle was, don't say the angle, Mia said, surprised by the weight in her own voice. Don't insult my eyes, silence held. When he spoke again, he'd shifted to the timbre that calms investors. Optics are unfortunate. It was a private moment taken out of context. Our PR I am not a PR exercise, Mia said louder. Her hands trembled under the hoodie's soft discipline. Leela pretended not to hear, which is how friends listen best. If this is how you talk to me at midnight on a night like this, you've already explained everything I needed to know. Mia, he said. Then reaching for control the way some reach for railings, please don't post anything. Don't respond. We'll craft a joint statement in the morning. I'll call Cassandra. She's excellent. The sentence lost its verb. Mia hung up and let the phone drop to the cushion. Tears didn't come yet. The body sometimes forgets the order of things. She watched parallel bars of light ladder the ceiling from the street outside. I'm not a joint anything, she said. To Lila, to the ceiling, to the version of herself that had waited to hear it. Good, Lila said softly. Hold that like a railing. At 12:46, an email arrived from Cassandra, the corporate domain polished like a shoe. Subject line in high heels, draft, coordinated messaging. Lila said, do not read that tonight. Mia opened it anyway because some part of the mind needs to see the weather to know which coat to wear. The draft was gentle as liability. It acknowledged intense public attention, expressed regret for any confusion, labeled the incident an unfortunate misinterpretation of affectionate behavior in a celebratory context, praised. Coldplay for connecting people in difficult times, and ended with a promise to respect privacy as we work. Through this as a couple, Mia closed the laptop she'd already closed and stared at the faucet until it looked like an animal with teeth. I'm not in that sentence, she said. I'm a clause in his reputation. Her phone rang again. Unknown number. She ignored it. A text slid in from a colleague. The founders want you to take a few days offline. For your peace. I'm sorry. They're worried about clients? Brand safety, blah, blah, blah. Another message came softer. I'll fight for you Monday. Rest if you can. At 1:13 a.m., her mother called. Mia answered on the second ring because some voices are home even when houses are not. Filia, her mother said. And then the blanket sentence mothers learned to knit. Breathe with me. They did. Her mother asked no questions. We left the porch light on, she added, a ritual from the pre-cell phone years. We are awake for you. The night stretched its long, jagged self across the apartment, a landscape built by strangers' opinions. Lila dozed on the couch, a hoodie-shaped mountain range. Mia sat at the table with her graph paper notebook and made 3 columns with the calm accuracy of someone who trusts a ruler. What I know, what I feel, what I will not do, under what I know, she wrote. I saw what I saw. I heard how he spoke to me. I can choose the shape of my absence. Under what I feel, humiliated, angry, clearer than expected. Under what I will not do, let anyone else write this paragraph for me. At 3:07 a.m., a door slammed downstairs and a male voice rose in the stairwell, entitled Uninvited. Lila woke like a soldier. If that is, it won't be, Mia said, though certainty was not a tool she owned. The steps stopped to floor below. A neighbor's door opened-closed. The voice dropped to a mutter and thinned into air. The silence that followed was not relief. It was the space where a decision goes. She slept an hour, the color of sky outside turning the room the shade of wet slate. The world rearranged itself in her absence. A news site ran a breathless timeline. A radio show created a segment called When Love Goes Live. 2 podcasts recorded emergency episodes. By morning, Adrian posted a note that used privacy 3 times, and we asked for grace once. He did not use sorry. Lila left to shower and return with muffins. Mia stood under the hot water long enough to turn worry into steam, then dressed in jeans and a sweater the color of paper. She braided her hair and made tea because bodies like instructions. The doorbell rang. She glanced at the peephole expecting Lila and met a camera lens held a little below eye level. A man smiled with his mouth closed. "Mia, 5 minutes? Your side?" She shut the door. He didn't knock again, but his presence lingered like a smell. Later, a neighbor slid a note under the door. "Ignore them. I have a broom." And the righteous anger of the retired. A drawn smiley with sharp eyebrows. Mia almost smiled back. By 10, her agency sent an official email encouraging personal time for healing. Subtext smooth enough to skate on, "Please don't post anything explosive." An HR email suggested she route all press inquiries to them. A client wrote to pause approvals until further notice, citing sensitivity and brand safety. Mia rested her forehead on the table. The wood grain looked like rivers changing their minds. At noon, "Adrian, I'm sending a car. Join me at the office. We'll handle this like adults." She typed no, deleted it, typed adults apologize, deleted it, put the phone face down, and let unsent words ghost the room. "You need a lawyer," Lila said, returning with muffins and a legal pad. "Not to sue, to translate. NDA writes the difference between silence and erasure. I need someone who speaks contract, the way my mother speaks comfort," Mia said. By 2, Lila had found Marina Alves, an attorney who didn't brand herself as anything but had a reputation for treating women as clients, not crises. On the video call, Marina began with camera off and voice clear. "First, I'm sorry the world is loud," she said. "Second, you owe no one a statement except yourself. Third, let's pull your NDA up and look it in the eye." They screen-shared the contract. Marina navigated clauses like a traveler who'd memorized the road in the dark. "They can bind you to confidentiality about company information," she said. "They cannot bind your feelings, your life, or the fact of what you experienced. If they attempt to conflate those, we separate them with a scalpel." "What about his team?" Mia asked. "They want a joint statement." "If you want to say nothing, that's a full sentence," Marina replied. "If you want to say I saw what I saw, that's also a sentence. You can refuse to be in their paragraph. Do I have to meet him?" Mia's throat tightened on the last word. "You don't have to do anything that harms you," Marina said. "If you choose to meet, on your terms, in a neutral location with counsel, you can. But don't walk into a comms theater alone." After the call, Mia felt tired the way people do after a climb, the good ache of oxygen finding muscles. She texted her father a photo of the hoodie and the tea. He replied, "Your mother made feijoada. None of this is more important than that. Call when you can." The words hurt kindly. At 4, Adrian texted again, "I need to see you. We'll fix this." Lila read over Mia's shoulder and muttered, "We'll fix this." "Not what I did." She typed and erased 3 replies before sending none. By evening, the building's lobby had developed orbit. 2 tabloid photographers with long lenses, a freelance videographer whose smile asked forgiveness, while his camera asked for a paycheck. A woman with a phone held vertically at all times. The retired music teacher on the 8th floor patrolled with her broom like a benevolent tyrant. "They're bored by 5, she told Mia in the stairwell. "They go home to their lives. Remember that." Mia tried a walk, hoodie up, eyes down. At a bakery, the air was warm and sweet. She stood in line just to measure herself against something ordinary. A teenage girl recognized her. looked away, then looked back with a small, fierce nod. Mia paid for a croissant and a coffee she didn't want, and left both on a table near the door. The cashier said, "Hang in there," in a voice careful not to touch. People can be kind even when they're clumsy. That night, her agency scheduled a check-in. The founders' faces arranged themselves on the laptop into a tableau of concern. They praised her work and resilience, the way people praise a ship for not sinking when they forgot the lifeboats. They offered time away and gently asked that she refrain from further inflaming discourse. Mia said she would consider stepping back to rest. She didn't say she hadn't been online to begin with. At 9, Adrian called. She let it ring. He texted, "Media training tomorrow, 10 a.m., my office. At 10, this is fixable." She typed, "Not for me," erased it, typed, "It wasn't an accident," erased that too. Some truths do not deserve the smallness of text. Morning came with an interview, Adrian in a studio where the lighting made sincerity look like a commodity. He said respect and privacy and misunderstanding. He did not say Mia. The host nodded the way television nods, smoothly on cue. Her ticker summarized her life in fewer characters than a grocery list. Mia closed the laptop and sat with her notebook. She wrote a sentence she could carry. "I refuse to live inside someone else's version of me." She made a list titled Boundaries. No joint statements. No unscheduled calls. No use of my image for reputation repair. No apologizing for choosing silence. She underlined the last one twice. Around noon, an email arrived from Cassandra asking Mia to join a clarifying conversation at the company's HQ. Marina replied on Mia's behalf. "Carbon copying only, Lila. Mia will attend with counsel at 3 p.m., duration capped at 30 minutes. No recording. No joint statements." Cassandra confirmed with a smiley face, period. The lobby of Coal Dynamics felt like a temple to velocity, air-conditioned to persuasion, polished floors reflecting a geometry of ambition. Mia arrived in jeans, the grey hoodie under a dark coat. Marina beside her in low heels and a moral spine. Security scanned their IDs with an interest that wasn't human. An assistant with a chrome smile whisked them to a conference room, whose rose-gold fixtures tried too hard to look like grace. Adrian entered with a tie that had never seen failure. Cassandra, the head of comms, glided in on the oil of her own certainty. Her junior PR person brought water as if offering absolution. "Thank you for coming," Adrian said, sitting opposite Mia like a man who had arranged a negotiation with a rival, not a conversation with a person. "This has gotten out of hand. Things that are in hand rarely trend," Marina said lightly. "Before we start, a reminder, 30 minutes. Mia won't be signing anything today." Adrian cleared his throat. Cassandra smiled. "We're proposing a simple, elegant joint statement," Cassandra said, sliding a printout across the table. "It acknowledges emotions without assigning blame, thanks fans for their concern, and asks for privacy as the couple navigates this time." "The couple?" Mia asked, the words cool in her mouth. "Who is the couple?" "You and Adrian, of course," Cassandra said, a little laugh penciled at the end, as if the question were cute. Mia didn't touch the paper. "I am not a couple inside your paragraph." Adrian leaned forward, palms open, the choreography of reason. "Mia, optics matter. Investors get spooked. Our partners are aligned with your version," she said. "Not with mine. There is a difference." Cassandra's voice softened into the almost whisper reserved for women they expect to manage. "You have a lot to lose by escalating. The internet is unforgiving. If you speak rashly, people will pick apart your tone, your timing, your—" Marina's hand tapped the table, a tiny gavel. "We're not escalating," she said. "We're clarifying." Mia will not be participating in reputation repair. She has the right to state a simple fact or to say nothing. Adrian's jaw flexed. The angle made it look. Mia's chair scraped softly as she stood. Please stop saying angle. There are only so many times a woman can watch someone rearrange a truth she saw with her own eyes. The room went very still. Cassandra's smile lost a tooth. I came, Mia continued, because I thought I owed my past self one more attempt at eye contact. I do not owe a narrative. I won't be your we. If your board needs words, use yours. My silence belongs to me. Marina glanced at the clock. We have 8 minutes left. If you'd like to discuss returning Mia's personal items and ensuring her image isn't used in messaging, now would be the time. Adrian's eyes brightened with a flash of something. Hurt, anger, then flattened. Of course, he said, and nodded at the assistant, who made a note that would one day pretend to be compassion. They left with a discreet cardboard box. Books she'd kept at his office for days. She worked from there. A sweater that still held her shape, a coffee mug with a chipped rim, and a sketch she'd made of a logo idea he never asked to see again. In the elevator, Mia stared at the red digital numbers as if they might counter back to a version of herself that had never learned this vocabulary. In the lobby, on the way out, she recognized a dress before a face. Crimson. The woman from the VIP box stood near the revolving door, sunglasses on, though the day outside was gray. For a moment, Mia's body went cold, the way rooms do when AC kicks on too high. Marina's hand hovered near the small of her back. We can go around, she murmured. It's okay, Mia said. She was not sure if it was, but she was sure she could stand. The woman lowered her glasses. Up close, she looked both glamorous and very, very human, like someone who had a life before becoming an image. Mia? She asked softly. Yes, I'm Sienna, the woman said. The name landed without ceremony. I didn't know. She swallowed. I didn't know about you. Not like... She gestured vaguely, as if the air itself had filmed them. He said you were on a break. He said a lot of things. It would have been easy to hate her, to arrange Sienna into a villain with crisp edges. Instead, looking at her, Mia saw a person whose face had been used in someone else's plot. Sienna's eyes were wet, but not for the cameras. I'm sorry, Sienna said. I know that doesn't help. I wanted to say it to your face. Thank you, Mia said. 2 words, steadier than she felt. We both deserve better writing than this. Sienna let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I didn't sign up to be a lyric, she said. Especially not that lyric, Mia nodded. Take care of yourself. You too, Sienna said, and then they were strangers again. Except for the strange kindness of having met each other's eyes outside the internet. Back at the apartment, the box went on the floor like a small, awkward monument. Lila brewed coffee as if they were building shelter. How'd it go? She asked. He wanted us to be a sentence, Mia said. I declined. Good, Lila replied, pouring. Being nouns is exhausting enough. They sorted the box. The sweater went to the back of the chair, the mug on the counter. The sketch into the notebook as a reminder of how much work invisibility takes. When the doorbell rang again, it was not a camera. It was a delivery, no return address. Inside, a plain envelope. A printed final draft of the joint statement with track changes in red, each change softening Mia into compliance. Marina texted, ignore. I'll send a formal decline. Mia replied with a double checkmark. One for the email, one for herself. The week unfolded with the logic of weather. Morning outrage, afternoon analysis, evening edits. Strangers DM'd advice, condolences worse. A popular podcaster declared Mia complicit for having dated a powerful man, as if love were a contract drafted in perfect information. A columnist wrote that privacy is a quaint notion, a sentence that made Mia want to mail the woman her curtains. In the middle of the noise, a small message. The non-profit she had helped once wanted to hire her for a campaign, tiny budget, honest need. Mia said yes so quickly it felt like breath. She set up a desk by the window, second-hand wood, sturdy legs, a plant small enough to empathize. She put her favorite pen on the right and the graph notebook in the middle, like a compass. She wrote a brief for the non-profit that made their director email, "This is exactly right." She cried then, a quick, clean rain that washed her cheeks and left her able to see. On day 4, the agency asked for a meeting to align expectations. The HR director used sincere eyebrows. "Oh, we support you taking space," she said. "And we'd appreciate it if you refrain from posting until the situation stabilizes." "I haven't posted," Mia said. "Perfect," HR said. Pleased to have the outcome without the effort, her manager, who actually knew her work, texted afterward, "You are brilliant. The room is weird." "I'm sorry." "Please don't let them shrink you." Mia typed, "I won't," and surprised herself by believing it. Marina checked in every morning at 9 with bullet points titled, "Lines You Can Draw." Some were legal, some were simply human. You can choose not to meet him again. You can ask friends to stop sending screenshots. You can turn off push notifications and leave your phone in a drawer after 8 p.m. You can correct a lie once and refuse to repeat yourself for sport. You can tell the truth to yourself, even if you tell it to no one else. At dawn, Mia started running, short loops that made her lungs remember their capacity. The sidewalks belonged to dog walkers and street sweepers. Movement untied her. After one run, she stopped at the corner bodega and bought a ridiculous bouquet of sunflowers with money she didn't technically have for flowers. She put them in a chipped jar on her new desk and decided they were a budget line called Dignity. On day 6, her mother arrived with soup and a bag of folded laundry Mia hadn't asked her to fold. They ate at the small table and discussed a book they had both loved years ago. They did not say Adrian. When her mother left, Mia found a note tucked into the hoodie pocket. "You are more real than their noise. Love, Mom." She slid it under the notebook clip. The scandal morphed into a background process. The algorithms had new appetites. Mia still received messages. Half kindness, half commentary, but the volume was survivable. She muted phrases. She blocked accounts that treated her pain like content. Lila created a folder on Mia's phone called Receipts and moved every exchange with Adrian there. Not for revenge, but because the future respects documentation. On day 7, the agency's CFO asked Mia to sign a temporary visibility policy. A document that sounded like a dimmer switch and read like a gag. Marina advised decline. "You already have an employment contract." No new terms signed under duress. Mia declined. The CFO frowned through the email. The next morning, Adrian appeared outside her building with a driver and a bouquet that looked like it had its own PR firm. Security phoned up, he insists, and Mia asked them to tell him no. 30 minutes later, an expensive vase was left at the front desk with a note, "Let's fix this." Lila carried the vase up the stairs the way one carries a sleeping cat, set it on the table and said, "Art project?" They printed Marina's bullet list and slid it into the vase. Better, Lila decided. Flowers wilt. Boundaries don't. Mia slept, woke, made tea, worked. The non-profit campaign moved forward. She storyboarded a video that involved light traveling from one person's window to another's, a visual metaphor that didn't hurt to look at. The director cried on the Zoom in a way that made Mia feel like work could still be a verb, meaning to mend. 2 weeks in, Cassandra emailed again, and this time the subject line tried tenderness. "We'd love to clear the air." Marina wrote back, "There is no air to clear. There are only choices. Mia read the sentence 3 times and felt the shape of a spine she had forgotten she had. That afternoon, Mia went to the office she had shared with Adrian sometimes, not to see him, but to return a key card she didn't want to carry anymore. Security scanned her out with a beep that sounded like a door deciding to be a wall. In the hallway, she passed a framed photo from an awards night. Adrian at the center, executives orbiting, Mia off to the side, half-cropped by the frame. She paused and looked at her own half-face, lit by somebody else's flash. She imagined stepping out of the frame and the picture collapsing in on itself like a tent. She kept walking. In the bathroom near the lobby, she stood under the loud fluorescent light and washed her hands too long, as if clean were a temperature she could reach. The door opened. Sienna stepped in, crimson replaced by grey, sunglasses gone. A human woman washing her hands in the sink. "Hi," Sienna said. "Tentative." "Hi," Mia said. They stood side by side like strangers at a small ceremony. "He told me you were—" Sienna began, then stopped. "He told me a lot of things. I'm sorry I believe them. Belief isn't a crime," Mia said. "It's a resource that he overspent," Sienna said, a sad smile. "I'm leaving town for a bit." "Good," Mia said. "Find somewhere that doesn't echo." Sienna nodded. "Find the studio you told the world you want," she said, as if she'd seen through the door of Mia's chest. "Make it bright enough that none of this can cast a shadow when you stand in it." When Sienna left, Mia studied her own face in the mirror. It looked like a map, rivers where tears had been, roads where thoughts would go. She patted her skin dry, not to erase the evidence, but to mark the end of that moment. The hand dryer blasted like a plane, deciding, outside, the photographers were thinner. The retired music teacher leaned on her broom and said, "See? Bored by 5. They both smiled. Back home, Mia opened her notebook and wrote a line that could carry weight. "I refuse to be what they decided happened to me." Then below it another, "If my life is a sentence, I will choose the verb." She underlined choose. That evening, as the sun turned the buildings the color of ripe peaches, she recorded a short voice memo for herself, not to post, but to remember her own sound. "You did not cause a spectacle," she told the memo. "You were living a Thursday." Someone else turned it into content. Marina messaged, "Press still circling." Mia, "Less. Weather now, not a storm." Marina, "Good. Tomorrow I'll send you a template for a single-line statement if you ever want it. No shape but yours." Lila texted a screenshot of a comment thread where strangers defended Mia with sentences they would probably never say out loud to a friend. "The internet is weird," Lila wrote. "Sometimes it remembers it's made of people." Mia looked at the desk. The sunflower jar, the graph notebook, the hoodie folded under her chair, the box from his office now empty and collapsed beside the recycling bin. The room looked like a place where a person lived, not a location where content happened. She breathed. The rain had finally stopped. The air smelled rinsed. She sat, picked up her pen, and sketched a floor plan, not the old one, but a new one with morning light from the left and a long table and a small shelf for the mugs she would choose for herself. She drew a door and wrote "open" beside it. Then, almost shyly, she drew a tiny rectangle on the corner labeled keys. Outside the rectangle she wrote "mine" before closing the notebook. She added one more line at the bottom of the page, something for her but also, one day, for anyone who might listen. If you're feeling the tension in this story as much as we are, take a moment to subscribe to Her Rise Stories so you never miss the next powerful chapter. She smiled at the oddness of inviting a future while still cleaning up the past. But the sentence didn't feel like marketing. It felt like company. She left it there, a small lighthouse on the edge of a long coast. Night arrived softly without sirens. She turned her phone off and put it in a drawer, not because she was hiding, but because she was choosing. The kettle sang a small song. She poured tea and watched the steam write temporary poems in the air. She opened to a new page and titled it Chapter 4. She did not need to know every scene. She only needed the first direction. She wrote it in neat letters that did not shake. Tomorrow I start moving on purpose. Then she put down the pen and let the quiet grow until it fit the room. The scandal still lived out there, doing what scandals do. But in here, the next chapter had already learned her name. Morning didn't arrive so much as accumulate, grey light stitching itself across the ceiling until it could call itself a day. Mia woke before her alarm. The room quiet except for the radiator's small grievances and the brittle tick of a wall clock she hadn't noticed until now. Leela had fallen asleep on the couch again, hoodie over her head like a tent pitched against weather. The box from Adrian's office sat by the door, a neat monument to a life that was already packing itself away. The scandal had stopped roaring. It had learned to purr. It still lived in comment sections and think pieces, but the volume had shifted from siren to appliance. The world couldn't scream forever. It had 1,000 other things to eat. Quiet, oddly, made the isolation louder. Mia made tea because the body likes instructions. She poured slowly, listened to the thin music of ceramic against ceramic, and carried the mug to the desk by the window. The city looked rinsed, all the hard edges softened by last night's rain. She opened her notebook, graph paper like a grid she could step on without falling, and wrote a date at the top. Under it she made 2 lists, keep and let go. Keep, her name, her mornings, the plant on the desk, the run at dawn, the non-profit brief, Marina's number, Lila's spare key, her mother's porch light, her father's quiet faith, the studio dream, the part of herself that believed in slow work and right angles. Let go, joint statements, unscheduled calls, PR theater, the sweater that smelled like a room she didn't live in, the framed photo that made a lie of the night it captured, the river of other people's eyes, the reflex to apologize for breathing. She could feel how much space the second list would clear when she did it properly. Space was the point. Isolation can be a condition someone does to you. It can also be a choice you make for yourself so that your voice is the loudest thing in the room when you need it to be. She started with small, visible tasks, the tangible choreography of leaving. She boxed books that belonged to Adrian and left them by the door for pickup. She carried the vase of expensive flowers to the trash room, then changed her mind, fished it out, and emptied it in the sink. She didn't want to throw out anything alive, even if it was a symbol. She rinsed the stems, dried the glass, and filled it with pencils. Lila would call it on brand. The bouquet of sunflowers stayed where it was, ridiculous and brave. At 10, Mia called her landlord. Her voice was calm because she had practiced it. "I'd like to move to a smaller unit in the building," she said. "Same light if possible. Lower rent." The landlord coughed in surprise, then muttered numbers and dates. A studio on the 5th floor had just opened. Same morning sun, a view of brick and sky. She wrote 5F in the notebook and drew a tiny rectangle labeled Keys. Outside it again, mine, the agency emailed to support her sabbatical. The phrase made it sound like a sponsored trip. She accepted anyway. Gifts don't stop being useful because the giver is clumsy. The non-profit campaign sent a calendar with milestones marked in earnest green. Kickoff call, script draft, review, final cut. The smallness of the project felt like oxygen. Work, she had learned, could be a verb that meant to mend. By noon she was sorting clothes into heaps, what she wore because she liked it, what she wore because it photographed well next to Adrian's suits. She folded the second pile into a bag for donation. Not punishment, redirection. She kept the grey hoodie out, a uniform for quarantine and rebuilding. She slipped her phone into a drawer set to Do Not Disturb and let the drawer accept the weight. Afternoon brought a visit from her parents, who came as they always had, with food in plastic containers and too many napkins, and a willingness to sit in silence without making it a test. Her mother unpacked rice and beans, and a container of oranges peeled in a spiral like a lesson in continuity. Her father tested the wobble of the desk and nodded when it held. He examined the plant and decided it needed a larger pot. He made a note. They did not say Adrian's name. If names were furniture, they had chosen to leave that one in the hallway. "You'll bring the rugs when you move?" her mother asked, peering at the floor as if it had a future she could iron out. "Rugs make a room feel less alone. I'll bring the rugs," Mia said. She said it the way people say vows to themselves. Her father hovered by the box from the office. "Want help carrying this to the elevator?" he asked. The box was light enough to move and heavy enough to mean something. They both lifted. In the hall, the retired music teacher, Broom General, 8th floor, opened her door. "If anyone bothers you," she said, "I have a list of their mothers and a loud voice." Mia laughed, and the laugh sounded like something working. That night, the apartment felt like a stage after the audience has left, empty but charged with the memory of watching. Layla stayed again, this time in the armchair, feet tucked under her, reading. Mia lay in bed and made a new list in her head, what loneliness is and what loneliness is for. The first list filled itself fast. The second took discipline. She fell asleep making it. The days found a rhythm that wasn't quite a routine, but wanted to be. Dawn runs, tea, work on the non-profit script. Lunch with Lila at the table, because tables are better than couches for remembering posture. Marina's check-in at 9 sharp. Bullet points titled Lines You Can Draw, and a review of the NDA footnotes until the words softened into shape. Therapy on Wednesday afternoons with Dr. Coelho, who knew how to hold silence without stuffing it with advice. "Shame is loud," the doctor said once, "but it is also lazy." It repeats. Your job is to say something new. Saying something new meant choosing words that did not draft themselves. Mia practiced out loud in the kitchen. "I do not accept your version." No is a complete sentence. "I'm not available. I choose later for you and now for me." The sentences felt arrogant at first, like a jacket too bright to wear. Then they felt like clothes that fit. Isolation made the apartment echo in ways she hadn't noticed. The radiator sighed. The neighbor upstairs played the same piano scale badly at 4 in the afternoon. She imagined a small child with stubborn fingers. A dog 3 floors down barked exactly twice after every elevator bell. Mia began to learn the building's heartbeat. It made her feel less alone. Once, a magazine showed up in the lobby with Adrian's face on the cover and a headline that used the word storm as if it were a personality. Mia froze in front of the rack long enough for the concierge to notice. He lifted the magazine, slipped it into a recycling bin with the stealth of a magician, and returned to his desk. "Nobody reads that one," he said to the air. She smiled, because sometimes kindness is an act of choreography. Another day at the grocery store choosing tomatoes, Mia saw 2 teenagers watching a clip of The Kiss on a phone angled away from her. The sound was off. The subtitle shouted enough. For a second, oxygen forgot how to enter her lungs. She stood perfectly still, holding a tomato she didn't want, and counted backward from 50 by 3s, because that was one of the breathing tricks Dr. Coelho had given her. At 38, the panic eased. At 23, one of the kids looked up, recognized her, and looked down again fast. Shame is contagious. So is courtesy. Mia chose the tomatoes, chose a different aisle, chose her breath again at the register. Small victories count. Some days, they're the only ones available. The move to the 5th floor happened in a blur of tape and labels and neighborly nods. Lila coordinated boxes like a general. Mia followed her own instructions, written on blue post-its, desk last. Tea early. Sunflowers right in my hands. Her father carried the plant in a new pot, exactly one size bigger. No more, no less. Her mother turned the studio's window blinds half open, as if letting light in required precision. Room by room, the old apartment emptied. Mia stood in the doorway one last time and tried to see the place without the weather of the last 2 weeks. She pictured the first morning there, blue light pretending to be a lake, and told the room thank you, out loud. The room offered her a soft echo, which is all rooms can give. The new place smelled like drywall and beginning. The kitchen was small, the floor slightly uneven, the window generous with morning. Mia placed the desk in front of the glass, put the pen on the right, the plant on the left, the notebook in the middle, and the hoodie across the chair back like a flag of a country with one citizen. She unrolled the rugs because her mother was right. They make rooms less alone. She set the chipped mug beside the kettle and wrote Chapter 5 at the top of a blank page. Not because she knew the plot, but because she wanted the book to keep turning. Isolation did what it does when you treat it like a room and not a punishment. It began to teach. Mia learned exactly how long a morning can be when you do not fill it with other people's sentences. She learned the difference between rest and numbness. She learned the sound her own mind makes when it is kind. She learned to let text sit unanswered without apologizing for the pause. She learned to eat lunch before hunger became a tyrant and to sleep before exhaustion turned cruel. She learned that grief is a language the body speaks fluently. You can reply with water and walks. Work threaded itself through the quiet, like music you only hear when the audience leaves. The non-profit campaign became a small cathedral she could enter daily. She wrote a script about windows passing light from one apartment to another, about small gestures creating constellations. She storyboarded frames in pencil, then ink, then color. She recorded scratch narration in her own voice and hated it, because everyone hates their recorded voice. Then she played it back again and decided she could be gentle with it. The director cried on Zoom, not performatively, but like someone remembering why work matters. "This is exactly right," she said again. "You're exactly right." Sometimes the sentence is the therapy. Bills still arrived. Mia opened them with steady hands. She made a budget that did not include dinners that looked like jewelry or clothes that perform responsibility. She cancelled subscriptions she had forgotten to notice. She sold 2 pairs of shoes that belonged to someone else's calendar and used the money to buy a better chair. She said yes to 2 small freelance gigs from women she admired because admiration is a currency. She wrote an invoice and smiled at the ridiculous power of naming a number and having it return with a bank transfer attached. On Wednesday, Dr. Coelho asked her to tell the story of the last year using only verbs. "No nouns?" Mia asked, puzzled. "No nouns," the therapist said. "Nouns are costumes. Verbs are bone." Mia tried, met, laughed, moved, cooked, cancelled, postponed, smiled, posed, waited, watched, shrank, believed, asked, paused, ran, spoke, refused, chose. By the end of the list, she was crying. "There," Dr. Coelho said gently. "Those last 3, that's the spine. Not everything was progress. Some nights the silence grew teeth and bit." Mia scrolled old photos and remembered the weight of a hand at the small of her back and the way having a +1 makes rooms easier. Some mornings, the world outside the window looked like a party she hadn't been invited to. On those days, she wrote lists with childish headings, things that still work, the kettle, the plant, the neighbor's bad piano. The sun on the opposite brick at 8:13 a.m., the smell of oranges when you peel them in one long skin. The word enough. Messages from strangers kept arriving. Strange little boats docking at odd hours. Some were tender, some creepy, some hungry. She learned to delete whole categories without reading. She learned to reply with a single heart to women who said, "I left too." She learned to ignore men who wrote, "Be careful." Men like that always win. She learned to mute reporters who phrase their curiosity like compassion. She learned to block with the gentleness of someone closing a window in the rain. Midway through the month, Marina called with news couched in law. "His PR will run a rehabilitation tour," she said. "Profiles, charity appearances, the choreography, you know. They'll mention you less. This will help you." "It's weird to be helped by being erased," Mia said. "It's not erasure," Marina said. "It's a door you don't have to walk through." She paused. "You can choose to be quieter than a story about you." That afternoon, an email arrived from Sienna. It was polite, brief, careful. "Leaving town for a while. I wanted you to know I've told my own version of the truth to myself. That's the only person I owed. Wishing you a room with your own light." Mia replied with 2 sentences, "Thank you for the dignity of writing to me. Wishing you the same room. Night has its habits." It asked her to inventory the day. She tried to favor grace over accuracy. If she had eaten, slept, worked, walked, then it was a day. If she had also laughed even once, even at the retired music teacher's broom-based revenge fantasies, then it was a good day. She marked those with a star in the notebook, like a teacher grading a paper with encouragement instead of fear. When the non-profit video went live, it did not trend. It did not break 1,000 anything. It did, however, draw a message from a woman 3 neighborhoods away. "I put a lamp in my window tonight because your video reminded me that someone might need to see it." Mia cried, which is the only reasonable reaction to proof that art travels further than you can. On a Thursday that wanted to be spring, Mia rode the bus to her parents' house, sat at the kitchen table, and let her mother fuss over her papers. Her father brought out a tin of tools and fixed a desk drawer that had been sticking, even though he had never seen the desk. "Wood understands wood," he said, which made no sense, and the most sense. He asked whether she had thought about a name for the studio. Mia had been circling Aurora for weeks, drawn to the idea of light without source. "Aurora Langford Studio," he said, testing the sound, "has the right number of syllables for a sign." On the way home, a street musician played "Fix You" badly enough to feel like a blessing. Mia did not flinch. She dropped a coin in the guitar case and kept walking, not because the song had changed, but because she had. Lines you cross are sometimes lines you draw. Isolation became less a wall and more a room with a door she could open. She invited 3 women from her old agency over on a Sunday afternoon for coffee and quiet. No gossip, no autopsies. They brought pastries and questions about fonts. They left with hugs and a shared Google Drive called Counterweight. On Tuesdays, another neighbor, newly divorced, 2 plants from death, knocked to borrow a watering can and left with a crash course in repotting. On Fridays, Mia and Lila cooked something simple and watched a stupid movie and laughed until their insides unclenched. Community does not need to be large to work. It needs to be chosen. In the middle of part 4, right here, in the room where her isolation was becoming intention, there is a small invitation for anyone listening who finds strength in Mia's quiet rebuilding. If watching Mia step back from the noise and slowly rebuild her life gives you courage, take a second to subscribe to her Rise Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of resilience. The CTA sat in the narration like a hand extended, not a sales pitch. Then the story kept walking. Money remained practical. Mia took a micro-grant offered by the non-profit to upgrade her audio setup so she could record clean narrations at home. She learned just enough about compressors and noise floors to make a sentence sound like itself. She borrowed a friend's camera for a weekend and, with Lila's help, filmed a 30-second sample reel of her design process. Pencil, paper, hands, no face. Not secrecy, discipline. She also applied, reluctantly, to a small business mentorship program for women who'd been publicly tangled with powerful men. The application asked for a narrative of resilience, which made her roll her eyes and then, slowly, write one. She told the truth in 3 paragraphs that felt like 4. I believed the best of someone and was wrong. I confused proximity to power with safety. I learned my voice by hearing it ignored. I'm building something that does not require applause to exist. 2 weeks later, an acceptance email arrived with a list of mentors whose names she recognized from book spines and credit sequences. She cried again, which was getting old and never got old. At the first virtual session, the mentor, an architect with gray hair cut like a decision, listened to Mia describe the studio and said, "What is the smallest version of this that still feels like the thing?" Mia thought of the desk by the window, the plant, the notebook, the pen on the right. "This," she said, turning her laptop to show the light. "This is already the thing," the mentor smiled. "Good, then you're not waiting. You're working." Weeks hoarded themselves. Isolation turned into routine, routine into choice. The scandal became a sediment layer, present, shaping the bedrock, not defining the landscape. Sometimes a new clip would surface and swirl feeds for a day. Sometimes Adrian's name would reappear wired to some philanthropic initiative that didn't smell like its own intention. Sometimes people who used to nod at Mia in rooms looked away on the sidewalk. Sometimes others crossed the street to hug her. On balance, most strangers were strangers again. The world had moved on to its next meal. Mia's apartment learned to hold her without clinging. She walked barefoot more. She cooked dishes her mother had taught her, and ones she invented by accident. She found a thrifted lamp that made evenings look like poems. She filed all the paperwork Marina sent her way, disentanglements, opt-outs, letters that made reputations leave her name alone. She set alarms for water and for standing up. She started measuring time not in headlines but in pages, 3 a day, read with tea, underlined in pencil, reread later with a calmer mind. The lowest point came on a deceptively normal Tuesday at 4:30 in the afternoon. No reason. The light in the room grew heavy, the air too warm, and a thought as thin and sharp as wire slipped through her like a thief. What if I am the thing that happened to me? She sat very still and let the thought be a thought instead of a verdict. Then she opened the notebook and wrote it down exactly as it had arrived. Under it, she wrote Dr. Coelho's sentence from that second session. "Shame is loud and lazy. Answer it with something new." She answered with a list titled "I am also," a reader, a runner, a maker, a daughter, a friend, a person who waters plants and returns library books on time, a woman who learned to say no in a room designed for yes. The list didn't fix the wire. It dulled it. She went for a walk. The retired music teacher nodded from the elevator. The dog downstairs barked twice. The world continued. By the time the non-profit cut a check for the campaign, Mia had 3 more small contracts lined up through women who had seen the video and liked the verbs in her emails. She named the studio quietly on a landing page. Aurora Studio, white text on deep blue, a line beneath it that read, "Design as a way of arranging care." No contact form. Just an email address and a sentence about time. We answer slowly and on purpose. Layla teased her about the monk energy. Mia laughed and kept the line. When her father came to see the new place again, he stood at the window and squinted as if measuring angles. "This light," he announced, "is not forgiving." "That's good. You don't need it to lie for you." He fixed a crooked cabinet door and sat on the floor to drink tea because he liked floors. "You're building without applause," he said. "That's strong construction." Her mother hung a small framed print above the desk, just the word "Rise" in her looping hand. "It belonged in your room when you were 12, she said. "It belongs here now." Lila took a photo of Mia at her desk from behind, no face, only posture, and sent it back to her with a caption, "You look like a person with verbs." Mia set the photo as her phone background so that every time she unlocked it, she saw proof of a sentence that didn't need anyone else's punctuation. On a Sunday evening, the skyline pink and full of smugness, Mia opened the window and let the city's noise braid itself with the room's silence. She had the sudden sense that the isolation that had felt like a wall had become a chrysalis. She didn't rush the metaphor. She didn't earn it, but she allowed it. Some transformations announce themselves as headlines. Others arrive as a woman opening a window and noticing she can smell bread again. She closed the notebook on chapter 5 and, on a new page, wrote a title that made her hands shake a little. Chapter 6, The Beginning That Always Waited. She didn't know exactly what would fill it, only that it would not be crowded by other people's angles. She drew a tiny box in the corner and wrote keys again, because she liked the ritual. Then, because some habits become promises, she wrote the single line that had carried her through the last weeks and would carry her into the next. "Tomorrow, I keep moving on purpose." She underlined keep. She turned off the lamp. The room held the dark kindly. Isolation, once a sentence, had become a room she owned. The fifth-floor studio learned her footsteps like a new instrument learns its player. Morning light rehearsed across the rug, found the small plant by the window, flashed along the thrifted lamp that made evenings look like poems. The frame her mother had lettered, "Rise," leaned on a shelf like a promise that didn't need an audience. Mia stood in the square of light with tea cooling in her hand and said "start" under her breath. Not loud, just enough to hear herself obey. Rebuilding didn't arrive with trumpets. It accumulated from choices too small to post. Close the tab, lace the shoes, answer one email with care, send one invoice without apologizing for the number at the bottom, set the phone to do not disturb at 8 and leave it in the drawer like a sleeping animal. The calendar filled itself without a speech. Therapy Wednesdays, Marina Fridays, writing blocks in pencil that could forgive a messy day. The silence that once had teeth learned new manners. On the table, the graph paper notebook waited like a friend on a park bench, present, patient, unbothered by gaps in conversation. Mia opened to a clean page and wrote Aurora Studio at the top. Beneath it, she listed what already existed. One desk. One lamp, one plant, one woman, a handful of clients with earnest budgets, and a tiny reel that showed only fingers and paper, and the quiet choreography of a pencil turning into a screen. She drew a small box in the corner and labeled it Keys. Outside it she wrote Mine, because sometimes you need to see a word anchored to believe it. The first week after moving turned into work the way a path turns into a road, because the feet kept choosing it. She redesigned a community clinic's intake forms so patients wouldn't get lost in forests of boxes. She drew a simple mark for a women-run carpentry shop 3 neighborhoods over. The logo was just letters that knew how to carry weight. She built a 1-page site for a librarian starting a reading mentorship program, a page that whispered instead of shouted. None of it would trend. All of it mattered. Word traveled sideways, the way real work travels. The clinic director knew a social worker who needed a guide for parents in 2 languages. The carpenter's sister ran a bakery that wanted menus you could read without squinting. Each call began with a version of the same sentence. "We don't have a big budget, but we care a lot." And Mia's chest loosened, because caring is the resource that lasts. She said yes when the work aligned with the sentence at the top of her page, and no when it didn't, even when no felt like holding a door against a crowd. Pricing without apology was its own education. The first time she sent a quote that made her palms sweat, she closed the laptop and walked once around the block to keep herself from emailing a discount no one had asked for. When the client replied approved, she sat at the desk and cried, not for the money, but for the muscle that had just grown. She texted Lila, "I didn't bargain against myself today." Lila replied with confetti and the sentence, "That's a new bone." On the third Monday in the new place, the city's electrical hum drummed through the walls. The radiator sighed. The dog, 2 floors down, barked twice on schedule. And Mia stepped into a call she had been rehearsing in her head. It was a pitch. She usually hated the word. It smelled like rooms designed to like other voices. But this inquiry came from a women-led physical therapy co-op that wanted a brand that didn't look like a gym or a hospital. They had seen Aurora's tiny site, and the co-op rumor network had done the rest. "Tell us how you'd approach it," their director said. "On video from a room that looked like life, plant a little thirsty, a child's painting crooked and perfect behind her shoulder. I'd start by watching," Mia said, "and listening, and walking your day from the perspective of someone in pain." She talked about typography that breathes, forms that don't interrogate, colors that keep faith with the idea of rest. She didn't sell, she described. The grid of faces exhaled. After the call, she stood at the window until the adrenaline had someone else to live in. She wrote a proposal that read like a promise she could keep, sent it, and refused to hover over refresh. The next afternoon, "We'd like to move forward." She placed both hands on the desk and told the room thank you. Not because rooms can hear, but because gratitude makes the edges of time kinder. Small wins stacked like quiet bricks. The non-profit wired the first half of her fee on time, exactly as promised, which felt like dignity. The mentorship program paired her with a founder 10 years ahead who asked, "What's the smallest team that still feels like a team?" Mia surprised herself. 2. The mentor smiled. Then make a plan for 2. She didn't want a clone of herself. She wanted a counterweight, someone whose joy lived where hers went tired. Process, numbers, emails that arrived with bullet points and kindness. She thought of Amara, a project manager from the agency days who could organize chaos without turning people into items. They traded messages during the worst week. Mia wrote, "Would you consider a part-time partnership? 2 mornings a week to start. We'll protect Fridays and verbs." Amara replied in 9 minutes, "Yes, I like trains and clear lists and keeping promises. Let's try." They built a tiny scaffolding that fit in their palms, a shared doc that listed priorities in a voice that refused drama, a calendar that protected deep work, a weekly check-in that began with "How's your head?" before any task. Amara took invoices and turned them into something clean enough that taxes became a future Mia didn't fear. She also instituted no Friday surprises with the weight of a law. "If it can wait," Amara said, "make it wait." Mia nodded, grateful to be saved from herself. With Amara steadying the back office, Mia allowed herself 2 experiments. First, a monthly open studio, 5 women, 40 minutes. Bring any design tangle, no recordings, no invented scarcity. The first session filled in an hour, the second in 12 minutes. Second, a 1-page newsletter on the first Friday. A short note about typography that doesn't shout. Why dark mode is an accessibility choice. How to ask users for information without asking for their dignity. It wasn't marketing. It was company. In the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, an email arrived from a global brand whose logo could pay a year's rent with a single placement. A director had stumbled across Aurora's tiny site and the co-op's kind forms. They wanted a conversation about a patient-centered app. The brief used words Mia loved: access, dignity, clarity, and words that made her cautious: scale, speed, rollout. She read it 3 times and felt the room tilt toward a version of herself she didn't miss, the one who said yes before asking how much of her yes would cost. She wrote back with boundaries. I work with a small team by design. If we continue, we co-create a scope that protects users and the people making the work. I don't pitch spec. If that's incompatible, I understand. Then she stood up and washed a dish, because the body needs assignments while courage waits on replies. The response came, let's talk. That night over soup, Lila didn't squeal. She lifted a spoon like a gavel. Can the big thing fit inside the small thing without cracking it? Only if it comes through the door like everyone else, Mia said. The door, in her mind, was the sentence she'd written under Aurora Studio. Arrange care. The first call with the brand had 6 faces and a fantasy of speed. Mia named constraints the way a person names allergies at a dinner party. Early, calm, with reasons. I don't scale fast, she said. I scale right. If you need a stadium, I'm not it. If you want a room where we can hear the user breathe, I can build that. Silence. Then the VP smiled. Rooms, we need rooms. The project moved forward in a shape Mia could lift. Not every door opened. Her old agency, nudged by a client, redesigned a page and erased her name from a case study as if erasure were a clean line. She didn't write to argue. She printed the old page and filed it in receipts, because the future respects documentation, and then she closed the browser. There were other pages to make. Sometimes the past sent a soft echo. A message from Sienna, I'm okay. Thank you for your kindness in the lobby. Mia replied, I'm glad. I hope you find a quiet that grows you. It didn't make anything neat. It made the world slightly less cruel. That was enough. The mentorship cohort met in person, in a borrowed library room that smelled like paper being patient. 12 women, 12 kinds of rebuilding. A chef starting a subscription for meals that don't apologize for being food. A photographer refusing to make grief pretty. A coder teaching grandmothers to secure their phones. They went around the table with names and the sentences they were trying to live. I'm Mia, she said when it was her turn. I arrange care so people don't notice it's work. Heads nodded because the sentence felt like a verb, not a brand. They did an exercise called No More. Each wrote a list of performances she was finished performing. Mia wrote no more auditioning for rooms designed to forget me. No more shrinking to fit calendars I didn't choose. No more calling harm an oversight. No more mistaking proximity for safety. No more letting my quiet become someone else's soundtrack. She folded the page and tucked it behind keys. The brand project advanced like a careful tide. Mia and Amara mapped their discovery in modest boxes. Mia sat with patients, nurses, receptionists with wrist braces from years of work, and asked the kind of questions that open rooms. She wrote microcopy that didn't scold people for being sick. She built exits that weren't punishments. She argued with grace for one more day at the end of the sprint so the form could ask less and mean more. The VP wrote, "We can hear breathing in this design." Mia let the sentence warm the room. Evenings learned to end. She turned the phone off and put it in the drawer, not to hide, but to choose. She read one poem before bed, not to be lofty, but to remember how sentences behave when they're not being sold. She ate at the table. She watered the plant and its cutting, tempo, when the soil asked, not by calendar. She slept. A knock came one golden hour, human, not urgent. The retired music teacher from 8 stood with a plant cutting in a jar. "This grows fast," the woman said. "You'll need to repot it by May. That's good luck and a chore." "Keep both." Mia set the jar next to Tempo. 2 greens, 2 beginnings. She laughed at herself for naming plants and decided laughter was a kind of water. Not all invitations were welcome. A television producer offered a panel on modern scandal and feminine resilience, a stipend too small and a premise worse. Mia forwarded it to Marina. "Hard no." Marina replied, "The hardest." Amara added, "Calendar shows you're at capacity with dignity that day." Bills continued to arrive. Mia continued to pay them. She built a reserve with the boring discipline of someone who had learned the cost of weather. She chose a health plan that didn't punish independence into fear. She cooked. She took walks without headphones. She learned the city's 8:13 a.m. light on the opposite brick and treated it like a class she didn't want to miss. Spring reached a hand into the room. The co-op launched their brand, and a woman in their community wrote, "I didn't cry filling your form this time. Thank you." The brand pilot shipped a small flow. A nurse emailed the VP, who forwarded it to Mia. "This is the first intake that asked more than it assumed." She read it 3 times. Sometimes praise is medicine best taken slowly. Her open studio kept filling. The newsletter passed 1,000 subscribers by accident. A student asked to shadow for a day. "There will be more email than magic," Mia warned. The student came anyway, took notes with reverence, and left a tiny origami crane on the lamp base. Paper can be patient in 3 dimensions, too. She began giving small talks again, not on stages that force a microphone into your mouth, but in rooms where chairs creak and the mic sometimes cuts out. She spoke about verbs and bones, about interface empathy, about why cancel should say "go back," because humans are not errors. After one talk, a man approached to say he'd worked with Adrian and it's a shame things got messy. Mia looked at him as if he'd misnamed a very old tree. "What happened was clear," she said evenly. "Clarity is not mess." He had nothing to add. On the anniversary of the live stream night, she kept no ceremony. She ran at dawn, answered 3 emails with care, bought bread, watered Tempo and the older plant. In the afternoon, she opened the notebook to chapter 6 and wrote in the margin, "An anniversary can be a mile marker, not a monument." She closed the book and watched the brick catch light like a gentle fire. End of ritual. The brand asked if Aurora could take on a second flow. Mia looked at the scope, at Amara's calendar, at her own bandwidth like a finite number of good decisions, and said, "Yes, if we add 2 weeks and keep the room small." The VP agreed. Mia texted Lila, "We're not growing fast. We're growing true." Lila answered, "That's the only speed that keeps the engine." Some nights the old wire thought returned, thin, cruel. What if I am only what happened to me? She answered with the list she kept taped inside the notebook cover, also a reader, a runner, a maker, a daughter, a friend, a woman who pays her own bills and chooses her own Tuesdays. The thought didn't always retreat, but it learned it wasn't the only voice at the table. A letter arrived on heavy paper. A Regional Design Award nomination for the co-op project, Community Impact. Mia laughed at the sink. Awards don't make work real, but sometimes they ring a bell you didn't know you wanted to hear. She texted the co-op director, who replied with emojis that looked like a party thrown by physical therapists. "We'll go if we win," Mia wrote. "We'll go if we don't," the director shot back. "We already won the form." Success changed shape for her. It wasn't zeros or square footage or walking into a room and being handed a microphone. It was mornings where the calendar looked like a promise she could keep. It was invoices paid without midnight self-discounts. It was emails answered without performing. It was the student's crane, tempo needing a bigger part. The sentence "no" spoken without flinching, and "yes" said only to things that could survive under sunlight. One evening, she opened a blank doc and titled it "Practices That Keep Me." She wrote, "Walks without headphones. Lunch at the table. One poem before bed. Turning off the phone at 8 and putting it in the drawer. Not letting other people's urgency draft my day. Asking, what's the smallest version that still feels like the thing? Blessing the work when I start and when I stop." It read like a recipe for a body carrying a life, not the other way around. A week later, she and Amara met at a cafe that used mugs instead of paper. They talked pipelines and pauses, rates and limits, the difference between busy and booked. "We can bring on one freelancer for the second flow," Amara said. "Only one, and we protect Friday." Growth could be a chair added to the table, not a stadium announced in a press release. Mia nodded. Before they left, Amara said, "You're a better creative director than you think." "I don't want to direct people," Mia said. "That's not what I said," Amara smiled. "You direct care." She tapped the plant icons Mia drew to mark deliverables. "You put water where leaves are thirsty." That's leadership. It just refuses the loud name. On a bird-loud Sunday morning, an email landed from a high school teacher who ran a girls' design club. "They think design is mostly about being clever and loud. Will you tell them about being clear and kind?" Mia said yes before caution could edit the sentence. She visited a week later and found 12 teenagers with sharp eyes and notebooks full of angles. She told them about verbs and bones. She told them that sometimes the bravest button is later, that progress bars should be truthful, that people are not edge cases. She showed them how a sentence can lift weight without raising its voice. When she finished, they asked if design could be a way to take care of each other. "It can," she said. "It is." At home that night she wrote in Chapter 6, "Teach more." Making isn't the only verb. She made soup, called her mother, watched the late light perform its warm trick across brick, and felt a heat that owed nothing to a headline. The award dinner filled a ballroom with linen and promises. The co-op borrowed 2 thrift store dresses and looked like excellence anyway. Mia wore a black suit that fit like a decision. Their category came with language that sounded like sunlight and work. Aurora Studio appeared on the screen. Her throat tightened. They didn't win. Another group deserved the clapping. Mia clapped until her hands warmed. Afterward, the director hugged her and said, "You put a ramp where others put a rope." Mia went home with sore hands and a quiet that tasted like victory anyway. On the walk back, under a sky practicing summer, the director asked, "What will you do tomorrow?" "The same thing," Mia said. "Send files, ask good questions, water plants, keep the room small enough to hear the user breathe." Rebuilding had taken months that felt like days and days that felt like houses. It had turned isolation into intention, intention into action, action into a life that could hold itself. The scandal still existed. Weather always does. But now, when wind pressed against the window, the leaves moved and then stilled, and nothing inside broke. Before sleep, she wrote one more line at the bottom of Chapter 6. Not a vow, a direction tomorrow, expand by 1 true inch. She slid the notebook under the lamp, as if light could keep it brave. Outside, the city breathed its reliable confusion. Inside, Mia slept. The studio knew her steps now. Morning would arrive the way it liked to arrive. Quiet, on time, with enough light to read by. The first sign that transformation had already begun was not a headline or a contract with too many zeros. It was the way mornings arrived in Mia's studio, sure of themselves, unhurried, a soft certainty pooling on the rug. She no longer waited for permission to start. She simply began. Tea, window, notebook, pen on the right, plant on the left. "Morning," she would say out loud to a room that now answered back by being exactly what she needed. Aurora Studio breathed in a stable rhythm. The physical therapy co-op lived in the wild, making it easier for people to heal without feeling like paperwork. The Global Brands pilot was careful, human, a small room inside a machine that had been taught to listen. The open studio sessions sold out in minutes without shouting. The newsletter, clear and kind, arrived on the first Friday like a reliable train. The studio's inbox held fewer knives and more invitations that sounded like verbs. Growth, when it came, felt less like an explosion and more like spring pushing through stubborn ground. Amara expanded her hours to half-time and introduced office hours on Tuesdays, 1 hour when anyone on a live project could bring a tangle and leave with a plan. "We are not a fire department," Amara would say, smiling. "We're urban planners. We prevent panic by drawing streets." Clients learned the difference. Panic receded. Mia wrote practices that scale with integrity on a fresh page and listed rules she was not willing to break for momentum. Keep rooms small. Protect Fridays. Write emails that sound like a person. Ask less from users than you think you need. Measure success in relief as much as revenue. Pay contractors on time and without drama. Leave space for repair. She taped the list above the desk. The list taped her to herself in return. With the studio stabilized, the mentor from the cohort asked a question that lodged like a helpful stone. What would ambition look like if it refused to imitate the people who hurt you? Mia looked around her room, at light, plant, paper, and answered by drawing a map. The lines didn't point to empire. They pointed to depth. A fellowship for young women to learn interface empathy, a pro bono lane for safety shelters and literacy programs, a library of small, reusable patterns that encode care so teams stop reinventing kindness from scratch. Not scale for its own sake, contagion of good defaults. The fellowship began with an email to 12 women and non-binary students who had written to her after talks. 2 Saturdays, no fees. Bring your laptops and your questions. They came in with shy eyes and bright notebooks, sat on thrifted chairs, and learned to measure white space the way you measure a pause in a conversation. Mia showed them why back is kinder than cancel, why forms shouldn't assume last names, why progress bars should tell the truth. At lunch, they ate bread and oranges and asked the question she had asked in her head 100 times. How do you build work that isn't a performance? "You make the performance too expensive to keep paying," Mia said. "You pay only for what lasts." By the second Saturday, the students had designed small flows for real people, an intake for a women's clinic, and library card sign-up that didn't make undocumented readers feel hunted, a city permit request that didn't punish the poor with time. They watched a woman from the shelter program tap through a prototype and exhale. The exhale was the grade. They passed. The pro bono lane started with a single email from a shelter coordinator. "Our website keeps scaring the people we want to help." Mia wrote, "Then it's not our website for long." She and Amara carved out 10% of hours for organizations whose work moved human weight. They built a calendar that did not burn the staff and tapped 3 trusted freelancers for tiny sprints. It looked small on paper. It felt large in the body, a muscle growing in the right place. In the background, the scandal continued in the way weather lingers in the bones of old houses. Some days, a gust of conversation rattled the windows. Most days, the glass held. Adrian resurfaced as powerful men do. Brushed, pressed, photographed near philanthropy. Press learned new adjectives. The world performed amnesia at the expected rate. Mia did not watch the performance. She learned the discipline of letting some people become historical facts. On a rare day when the wire-thin thoughts spiraled, what if the world forgets that he hurt me? She answered with a gentler one, what if the world remembers that I built anyway? Aurora's second year began like a breath taken on purpose. The studio moved down the hall to an L-shaped unit with the same unforgiving light and space for a second desk. Amara brought a tiny brass bell and placed it by the door. We ring it for process wins, she said. Not press wins, process. They rang it for the first time when a client approved a scope with extra time to breathe written into the contract. With breathing room secured, Mia returned to a project that had napped under her bed, the Patterns of Care library. She wanted to give away what could be made common, error messages that didn't scold, account recovery that didn't shame, permission prompts written like invitations instead of threats. Each pattern included research notes, accessibility checks, and language variants that respected more bodies than English alone. She released the first batch quietly on the Aurora site with a short explanation, use freely. Credit if you can. Improve wherever you take them. The thread slipped through design forums and without virality found the people who had been waiting. A municipal team in Portugal used the grief pattern for a death certificate flow. A clinic in Manila adopted the tell me once principle for complicated families. A school district in Ohio copied the pause without losing your place component, so parents paying fees over lunch breaks didn't have to start again from zero. The library did what libraries do. It multiplied the kindness of a single room. Teaching found her more often. She accepted invitations to small conferences that didn't confuse spectacle with scholarship. She refused panels and accepted workshops. She designed an exercise called Verb Audit. Participants list the verbs their product uses on real screens. The room becomes an X-ray. Pay, submit, cancel, deny lined up like soldiers. Mia asked, where a pause, save, learn, return, ask, rest. The silence that followed was a curriculum. Later she would hear from attendees who replaced cancel with go back and watch drop-off fall because kindness is efficient. Transformation is both architecture and ritual. Mia understood this in her bones the morning she asked herself aloud in the kitchen, what would make this studio kinder to the two people who work here? The answers were small and precise. A no meetings after 3 line that could be broken only by consent. A rule that the first Monday hour was for health admin, appointments, prescriptions, anything bodies need to keep going, because calendars punish maintenance. A budget line called unexpected tenderness for stipend cards, flowers, a book mailed to a student who needed proof that someone had read her writing carefully. None of it showed up on a balance sheet, all of it compounded. One afternoon near summer, the global brand asked whether Aurora could lead a cross-team workshop to canonize care. The word canonize made Mia want to laugh. Words choosing robes they didn't need. She set terms. The room must include receptionists and nurses, not just product. The day must begin with a patient story told by the patient. Decisions must exit the building printed and signed, not left to the wind of follow-up. They agreed. The workshop began with the woman describing the day her father died, while an app insisted on a 12-character password containing a symbol. By lunch, the VP had sent an email committing the company to remove the 12-character rule for grieving flows. Mia watched a policy ripple out and thought, this is what scale should look like. Not louder, but better. That night, back in the studio, she added a page to the practices notebook titled Scale Tests. Will this change make a receptionist's day easier? Will this change reduce a user's heart rate? Will this change let a worker go home on time? If no, it isn't scale. It's signage. As summer leaned in, Her parents visited with strawberries and a small victory of their own. Her father had finally retired. Retired from pay, he clarified, setting down a tin of screws. Not from fixing things. He insisted on oiling the studio door hinges while her mother rearranged a stack of library books by thickness and logic that made sense only to people who organize for pleasure. "You look lighter," her mother said, handing Mia a strawberry like a communion. "Not because the world is kinder, because you stopped asking it to be." One morning, a message arrived from a man named Evan, a journalist whose writing rarely behaved like a chase. He wanted to profile the Patterns of Care Library and the Fellowship, not a comeback story. "I'm not interested in the scandal," he wrote plainly. "I'm interested in the verbs." Mia read the note twice and sent it to Marina with a raised eyebrow. Marina replied, "He's one of the few. If you do it, we set terms in writing. No names that don't belong to your life." Mia agreed with conditions that would have made other reporters balk. Evan signed without comment. The piece arrived like a letter to a friend, clear, accurate, uninterested in myth. It quoted Mia on error states and told a story about a clinic receptionist who cried when the new interface stopped making her apologize for delays she couldn't control. The article did not trend. It traveled quietly to the inboxes of people who build things. The next week, 3 municipal teams wrote asking for permission to translate the patterns. "You don't need permission," Mia wrote back. "You have my hope. Transformation has a way of calling back parts you set aside." On a late summer Thursday, the library down the street asked whether Aurora would help redesign their card application. "We lose people at question 3, the librarian admitted. "They think we're the DMV." Mia walked the stacks with a measuring tape in her head. She sat with a teen who had lost his card 3 times because the address field made him feel like a trespasser in his uncle's apartment. She sat with a grandmother whose hands shook when she typed. She sat with a mother who didn't want to list a second parent who hurt more than he helped. The new flow asked less. It accepted care of. It delayed proof until joy had a chance to show up. It printed a temporary card at the end of minute 2. The day it launched, a line formed not because the system slowed down, but because news of kindness spreads faster than marketing. When fall came, Aurora Studio accepted one speaking invitation that felt like a risk. The closing talk at a design conference known for its bravado. Mia agreed only when the organizer promised an hour, a quiet room, and no panel afterward. She wrote the talk like a letter to who she had been, how to build when spectacle is cheaper. She told the story of the year without names, concentrating on verbs and rooms and the patient work of making dignity a default. She showed a slide with the scale tests and a clip of a receptionist exhaling. In the audience, people stopped taking pictures. They took notes instead. Afterward, the organizer whispered, "We've been loud for so long. Thank you for reminding us how to hear." Mia left before the after-party, walked 3 blocks to a small restaurant where the lighting made faces honest, and ate alone with relief as a waiter who didn't know her brought water without asking. By the end of the year, Aurora had paid 4 contractors fairly, delivered 9 projects that mattered, funded 3 pro bono sprints without heroic suffering, and graduated the first fellowship cohort. The studio's financials were not a fantasy. They were a table that didn't wobble. On the last workday, Mia and Amara sat on the floor with tea and wrote 2 letters, what we keep and what we change. Keep tempo, rooms, Friday protection, office hours, the fellowship, the library of patterns, the brass bell. Change, 1 more day per sprint for QA, a clearer boundary around scope creep. Amara drew a moat with tiny alligators. A rotating reading hour in work time because the brain works better with new sentences in it. They signed the letters and taped them to the inside of the supply closet where only the two of them would see, because vows don't need an audience to hold. Winter sharpened edges and made the plant curl inward. Mia curled too, books, soups, longer sleeps. The wire thought visited less. When it did, it found fewer places to hook. On a snow-quiet morning, she opened the notebook to Chapter 7 and wrote the simplest plan she had ever loved. More of what works, less of what doesn't. Then she added the only complicated line she would allow herself that month. Teach the fellowship to write proposals that don't apologize. The second fellowship began in February, with applicants from 4 time zones and the same hunger. One participant, Kemi, arrived with a portfolio full of cleverness and eyes that wanted a different metric. By session 3, she had redesigned a benefits enrollment flow for a local hospital, so that an immigrant nurse didn't have to lie about a middle name that had never existed. "This is what I want to do," Kemi said after the user interview, voice small, joy big. Mia wrote a reference that read like a blessing and texted Amara, "If we ever grow, we grow Kemi Ward." Growth came in a shape they could carry. The global brand expanded Aurora's scope by exactly the inches Mia requested. The co-op referred 2 more clinics. The city library asked for help translating the new card flow into 3 languages without making the fonts cruel. And a foundation offered a grant to formalize the Patterns of Care library into a living repository with contributors, not a single author. "Only if it stays free," Mia said, "and only if the first committee includes a receptionist." The foundation agreed, perhaps because they were desperate, perhaps because they were wise. The committee's first meeting included a receptionist, a nurse, a social worker, a municipal clerk, a teen who had fought with a form, and 2 designers. The receptionist cried when she realized she wasn't there to be a story. She was there to be a vote. If ascension means anything, Mia decided, it means more people rising with you than watching you rise. The studio stayed small. 2 people, a few regular collaborators, but the circle around it widened with intention. The retired music teacher from 8 started a free Wednesday lesson for kids in the lobby using a broken keyboard and the Aurora lamp Mia had replaced. Leela mentored a student who wanted to be a journalist, who didn't hunt. Mia's parents came by on Sundays with oranges and a new set of screws. Her father taught her how to replace a hinge as if it were a parable. "Everything gets to swing," he said, "but only if the pivot is true." One evening, a letter arrived from a lawyer who represented Adrian's company. It was thin as a threat and thick with implication, language about mutual respect, false statements and damages. Marina read it, laughed once, and wrote a 4-sentence reply that managed to be both civil and steel. "My client has made no statements about yours and reserves the right to describe her own life. Please do not mistake absence of interest for absence of counsel." Nothing further arrived. Some storms end when they cannot find anything to hit. As winter softened, Mia found a new measure for transformation, the number of times she reached for her phone and chose her notebook instead. In the notebook she wrote, "Proof I changed," then made a list so unglamorous it felt holy. "I take lunch away from screens. I stop working at 6 without apology. I answer slowly and on purpose. I ring the bell for process, not press. I pay people in 10 days, not 30. I water plants before they suffer. I ask, what would make this easier? In every room I enter." Underneath, in small letters, she added, "I believe myself the first time." Spring returned with green insistence. The plant by the window asked for a bigger pot again. The cutting tempo had outgrown its jar and demanded soil. Mia repotted both, hands dirty, heart calm. As she pressed the new earth around the roots, She remembered the sentence that had started this chapter. Tomorrow, I keep moving on purpose. Tomorrow had turned into a habit. The day the Patterns of Care repository launched under the Foundation's umbrella, the homepage featured a small paragraph Mia fought to keep. These patterns were written by people who do the work and the people who endure it. If you use them, pay someone's receptionist more. If you improve them, send us the better version. If you profit from them, fund a shelter. The Foundation wrinkled at the last line. Mia unwrinkled them by refusing to remove it. The line stayed. Funding arrived anyway. On the anniversary of Aurora's founding, Amara placed the brass bell in Mia's hand. "Ring it," she said. "For the fact that this is still small, still kind, still working." Mia rang it twice, once for the work they could name, once for the relief they couldn't measure. They ate cake at the desk because desks should know joy. That afternoon, as the city rehearsed Summer in the Streets, Mia answered an email from the girls' design club teacher with a yes that felt like breathing. "We'll host you here this time. Bring the club. The room is ready." The teenagers arrived the next week, all edges and laughter and questions that made the future feel possible. Mia handed out paper and sharp pencils and taught them the verb audit. She watched them change, cancel to go back, and grin like they had discovered a secret tunnel. "You did," she told them. "You did." In the quiet after they left, Mia opened the notebook to chapter 7 and wrote the last line of the chapter, the way she had learned to write everything now. Slowly, with the weight distributed evenly across the page, I didn't climb a ladder. I built a room, and then I learned to open the door. The room held the sentence like a bowl holds water. Outside, the city kept doing what cities do, forgetting and remembering, breaking and mending, demanding and singing. Inside, Mia stood, placed the pen on the right, the plant on the left, and turned off the lamp with a hand that no longer shook. Tomorrow would come, as it always does, and she would greet it as she always had, since the night the camera taught her about angles. With verbs, with care, with a door she could open from either side. She locked the studio, stepped into the hallway warmed by late light, and felt something like arrival without an audience. Ascension, she realized, doesn't look like a spotlight. It looks like a woman carrying her own keys, leaving a room she made better, and walking toward the next one she will make kinder. The year Aurora Studio turned 2, the plant by the window outgrew its second pot. Transformation, Mia had learned, doesn't ask for permission. It asks for soil. She pressed new earth around the roots, wiped her hands on a dish towel that had seen more beginnings than spills, and turned the brass bell in her palm. "Process win," she said to the room, and rang it once. Clear, small enough. Work had become a place to stand. The physical therapy co-op system was now muscle memory for its staff. The Global Brands app had more rooms where people could breathe. The library card flow had reached 3 more districts, each translating kindness into their own syntax. The fellowship's second cohort was mid-sprint. Gemi had just led a session where she corrected a form that treated families like geometry problems. Amara's calendar blocks looked like arranged blessings. Office hours, no Friday surprises, reading hour, health admin. The studio was still 2 people, 3 regular collaborators, and a parade of names on invoices that came back with thanks instead of questions. Mia measured success in exhalations sent to their inbox on a late morning bright enough to forgive the city's noise. A message arrived from the Mayor's Office of Digital Services. Invitation, Civic Care Summit, keynote on dignity by design. It was not a stage she had asked for. It was a room she could use. She wrote back with conditions that now lived in her fingers. The first 10 rows must be city workers who took calls from the public, not just department heads. A receptionist or clerk must introduce her. She would not sit on a panel afterward that turned pain into a debating sport. The reply came, agreed gladly. Amara added it to the calendar with a small bell emoji. The summit's venue was a union hall with walls the color of earnestness. Before the keynote, Mia stood backstage next to Rosa, a clerk from the housing department with knuckles made honest by paper. Rosa was nervous about introducing someone whose name had started showing up online. Mia was nervous about being introduced for anything other than the work. They did what nervous women do. They told each other what they admired. "You built a library of patterns that felt like mercy," Rosa said. "You have stood where shouting wouldn't help and kept talking anyway," Mia said. The stage manager waved them forward, as if pushing two boats into a current. Rosa introduced her in less than a minute. Name, studio, and the reason the room should listen, because forms are where government meets a person's kitchen table. The applause was a working person's applause, warm, tired, present. Mia spoke for 50 minutes in a voice that had learned how to stay level. She told stories about verbs and bones, showed slides of bad buttons and better ones, walked the room through the scale tests. Will this change make a receptionist's day easier? Will this change reduce a user's heart rate? Will this change let a worker go home on time? She ended not with a crescendo, but with a request. Write one sentence you can keep for a year. Tape it above your desk. Let it tape you to yourself in return, people wrote. When she finished, the applause was long but not loud. It felt like a decision. Backstage, the deputy chief of staff said they wanted to translate 3 of Aurora's patterns into city policy. With attribution, she said, and with money. Mia shook her hand not because of the money, but because of the sentence with attribution. Cities don't often say it. Later that day, the municipal legal team asked whether patterns of care could be cited in procurement guidelines. "Only if you also cite receptionists," Mia said, and watched the lawyer's face do arithmetic until it arrived at yes. The quiet wins, stacked like coins in a jar you don't shake. A nurse wrote to say the grieving Flo had let her step out of a room on time and cry in a supply closet without the app punishing her for late entries. A librarian sent a photo of a teen holding a temporary card, like it was a passport he hadn't known he could own. The global brand's VP changed Cancel to go back in their design system, and emailed to confess it had taken 6 meetings and a whiteboard. "We're stubborn," the VP wrote. "We are learning to be stubborn about better things." Not all notes were kind. A tech journalist with a taste for blood wrote a column that accused Mia of monetizing compassion. He listed her clients and pretended invoices were sins. The piece made a sound like teeth grinding. Mia put the link in receipts and did not read it twice. "Weather," Amara reminded her. And Mia returned to the map on her desk, where a breadcrumb trail of small verbs led away from opinion and toward work. Another letter arrived, on heavy paper, this one from a museum planning an exhibition on design for public good. They wanted to include Aurora's patterns of care, alongside historic transit maps and school lunch trays, to place microcopy next to macro systems and let visitors see how both shape a life. Mia wanted to say no. Museums had frightened her since childhood, with their preference for artifacts over people. She called her mother, who laughed and said, "Let the children press your buttons on the wall so they learn not to punish themselves." Mia said yes, under that condition exactly. The museum built an installation where kids could flip between cancel and go back and watch a cartoon heart rate slow. On opening day, a child pushed the button twice and said, "This one is nicer." His mother nodded, as if he had solved arithmetic. The fellowship grew its second spine. Kemi, now a co-instructor, created a module called Asking Less, where students had to remove fields from forms until the flow still worked. They struggled at first. Features are easy. Restraint is an art. And then they learned to trust the idea that kindness is design debt paid in advance. A student asked if kindness ever gets boring. Boredom is a symptom, Kemi said. If you're bored, you've stopped paying attention. Mia wrote that on the wall. In late spring, a request came wrapped in velvet and thorns, an invite to speak at a leadership forum sponsored by Adrian's company. The theme was responsibility in scale. The fee was absurd. The email's signature glittered. Marina texted, "Delete or decline." Mia replied, "I'll write a sentence that costs them more than the check." Her reply read, "Decline. Responsibility begins with repairing harm you created. I do not collaborate with institutions still practicing denial." She did not name the harm. She did not need to. Silence returned with the same speed the invitation had arrived. Sometimes the answer isn't a door closing. It's a hallway that never existed. Her parents' porch light, the ritual and the lamp itself, burned out that summer after 30 years. Her father insisted on replacing it himself and asked Mia to hold the ladder. The light's glass was warm from work. The bulb came free with a sigh. "Everything gets tired," he said from the second rung. "We bless it for the time it gave. Then we make it easy for the new thing to shine." He screwed the new bulb in and flicked the switch. The porch glowed. Mia thought about rituals and electricity and the humble science of showing someone the way home. On a Tuesday that insisted on rain, Rosa, the clerk who had introduced Mia at the summit, showed up to Aurora with empanadas and a question. "Can we borrow patterns of care for a new eviction mitigation flow?" she asked. "We're losing people to fear in step 2. They built the flow on the studio wall with tape and sticky notes. Explain before ask. Pause without penalty. Call me later. Trusted contact instead of second parent save and leave. Return where you left. They borrowed the receptionist's time and paid her for it. They sat with tenants and looked them in the eye while they tested. Fear didn't vanish. Fear never does. But it had fewer places to hide. The day the new flow launched, a tenant advocate sent a voice memo impossibly tender. "A man cried at step 3, she said. Not because he was afraid, but because he realized he could finish later. Mia played the memo twice, then pressed the brass bell with a fingertip, a private liturgy. Evan, the journalist who had written about verbs, reached out again. This time to ask whether anyone had copied patterns of care without credit. "Oh, constantly," Mia said, and then surprised herself. "But the patterns were made to be copied. What matters is where the credit lands." Evan wrote a follow-up piece about attribution that centered the receptionist committee and named every municipal team that had translated the patterns. It did not name Adrian. It had no reason to. The piece ended with a sentence that felt like a door opening. "Dignity is a supply chain. Improve any link, and the whole length holds more weight. Transformation involves reinvention, but it also involves repair." In late summer, Mia drafted a short private letter to her old agency. She thanked the people who had taught her, named the page where her credit had been erased, and asked gently that they restore it, not for clout, but for the truth. She expected nothing. A week later, the page returned to life with her name in small type and a note, "Original Design Lead, M. Langford." She took a screenshot and filed it in receipts, not as ammunition, but as a reminder that sometimes asking is enough. In September, the foundation hosting Patterns of Care convened their first public meeting. The committee sat in a circle that included not just designers, but the people who hold lines. A caseworker, a teacher, a bus operator, a clerk whose wrists wore braces from years of stamping. The agenda read like a choreography for kindness. They debated whether "Are you sure?" should live in flows that involved grief. They voted to add "Tell me once" as a default for any system that touches multiple departments. They removed a pattern that had seemed kind on paper but condescended in practice. "We're not canonizing mistakes," Mia said. "We're composting them." People laughed and took the metaphor seriously. One evening, Amara rang the bell 3 quick times, an unusual staccato. "What's the emergency?" Mia asked. "No emergency," Amara said, pointing to the inbox. "A note from the Global Brands Finance Department. Aurora's net 30 is now net 10. Mia blinked. "I didn't ask for that," she said. "You didn't need to," Amara answered. "A VP did. Turns out when you lower someone's heart rate, they become the kind of person who pays faster. Kemi accepted a job offer from a hospital system that wanted to rethink patient portals from the ground up. She came to the studio with donuts and tears. "I don't want to leave," she said. "You're not leaving," Mia told her. "You're extending the room." They drew a little floor plan on the graph paper that showed Aurora, the hospital, the co-op, the library, connected by arrows that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with influence.
"You'll call when a wall refuses to move," Mia said.
"I'll bring the metaphorical sledgehammer," Kemi promised. On a gold-edged afternoon, the museum exhibition opened. Children pressed the go-back button like it was candy. A mother read the grief pattern and put her hand on her heart. A father with a stutter tried to permit me to finish audio component twice and laughed, not at himself, but at the relief of finally being inside a system that expected him. One boy dragged his granddad over, pointed at "Tell me once," and shouted, "See, it should be like this." The granddad lifted him so he could touch the panel again. "You're right," he said. "Tell them." The boy did, because the button made it easy. After the opening, Mia walked home instead of taking a car. The city behaved like itself. Scooters disobeyed lanes, pigeons enforced theirs. A woman shouted on the phone and then laughed 2 blocks later. Someone burned onions, someone burned incense. The light traded coins with windows. A busker played a song she used to avoid. She dropped a coin in the case, not because she needed to make peace with anything, but because she liked the chord he found at the end, the invitation to return to the conference where she'd first met. Adrian arrived in an email with 6 exclamation points and a subject line that performed intimacy. She stared at it long enough to understand the variant of power it offered. The chance to stand on a stage and be seen winning in exactly the room that had once made her small. She closed the email. She did not reply. "Victory isn't a place," she wrote in the notebook. "It's a practice." In November, the city announced a pilot program, Dignity Defaults, a policy that required any public-facing digital service to pass 3 tests: plain language proof, pause without penalty, and return where you left off. They credited Patterns of Care and named the receptionist committee as co-authors. Bruiser texted a photo of the printed policy taped inside her cubicle. "Look what my wall gets to hold," she wrote. Mia cried in the kitchen with the dish towel in her hand like a flag. The year turned. Aurora's books balanced. The plant needed water. The lamp needed dusting. The bell needed ringing for the anti-climate of a scope, agreed without drama. On the studio wall, the map of arrows among institutions grew more lines, none of which pointed back to Adrian. He existed like weather in a history book, relevant once, required reading no longer. On the last day before the studio's winter break, Mia and Amara wrote their letters again. What we keep, what we change. Keep Fridays, office hours, reading, health admin, the fellowship, the patterns, the bell. the smallness that lets them hear breathing. Change, one more pro bono slot per quarter, funded by the brand's new grant. A translation budget for patents. A care audit checklist clients must answer before discovery. At the bottom of Keep, Mia added a line she couldn't have written 2 years before. Trust the quiet. Amara underlined it twice with a green pen. That night, Mia took the long way home, past the library where a temporary card machine now sounded like a soft chime. Past the Union Hall where Rosa had introduced her. Past the museum where a child's hand had slowed a cartoon heart. On her block, a porch light she didn't know glowed a familiar temperature. She thought about the ladder, the bulb, the way her father had called it work and blessing, the same act. In her apartment, she set the notebook on the desk, the pen on the right, the plant on the left. She wrote the title Chapter 8. The door I opened and lifted her head to let the room catch up. The brass bell waited, patient as practice. She rang it once for no reason or for all of them, and the sound unspooled into the evening like a thread someone else could follow. She wrote the last line of the chapter in the neat letters of a hand that believed itself. Legacy isn't a monument with my name. It's a set of defaults kinder than me that keep working when I rest. She closed the notebook. The room held. The city breathed. Morning would come in its unhurried way, and she would greet it with verbs, with care, with a door she could open from either side, now, always, and not because a camera asked, but because she did. By the time autumn returned with its crisp arithmetic, Aurora Studio no longer felt like an exception. It felt like an ecosystem, 2 desks and a brass bell, a wall where patterns grew in tidy rows. A calendar stitched with work and rest, like 2 fabrics learning the same seam. The plant by the window had learned the language of the light. The cutting called tempo had outgrown its shy roots. Mia stood by the glass, mug warm, and watched morning unfurl like paper. She said, "Begin," and the room agreed. The dignity defaults policy spread cityward the way useful news moves, quietly, by people who had to use it. Clerks taped the 3 tests to the backs of monitors. Supervisors quoted them in emails that finally had verbs. Receptionists carried photocopies in purses like permission slips you sign for yourself. Rosa texted a photo of a break room whiteboard where someone had written in thick marker, plain words, pause without penalty, return where you left off. Underneath, in smaller letters, breathe. At Aurora, the work kept widening while staying itself. The global brand committed to a second year of small rooms. The physical therapy co-op passed its design system to a sister clinic, like a good recipe shared among kitchens. The library card flow added 2 languages and a button that said, "Help me ask in person." The librarian wrote that people began choosing help earlier, which made help kinder. Mia filed the note in a folder called Proof, because some days you need evidence that the world can change on paper and in bodies. The Foundation's repository of patterns of care had become a living thing. Contributors submitted pull requests with phrases that made Mia clap alone at the desk. "I don't know yet," instead of N.A. "Tell me once" expanded to cover chosen families and caretakers. Quiet mode for survivors filling forms in rooms they didn't choose. The committee, receptionist, clerk, nurse, teen, teachers, designers, met monthly and composted mistakes into soil for new defaults. "We publish only what lowers someone's heart rate," Amara said, tapping the brass bell when a pattern made it through the tests. The fellowship's 3rd cohort began with 20 applicants and room for 8. Kemi, now full-time at the hospital, taught Wednesday evenings and arrived with stories that were, in their own way, rescue missions. "We removed 3 fields, and a nurse thanked me by breathing," she said, laughing through sudden tears. "That's the metric." Mia watched students learn to swap cleverness for care, speed for sequence, performance for presence. She watched their faces alter, while a woman from a domestic violence shelter tested a prototype and said, simply, "Thank you for not asking me to relive it. Transformation is often just iteration made sacred." Mia felt that truth settle into her spine the day a municipal team from another state wrote to ask if they could adopt dignity defaults under their own name. "Steal it," she replied. "But steal the hard parts too. The committee, the receptionist votes, the slow meetings where someone cries and the agenda waits." They agreed, and the policy left her city with more legs than a rumor. In March, an email arrived like a small bell rung in a different building. Invitation. National Civic Tech Gathering, keynote on Defaults as Dignity. The host was a quiet coalition of public servants and librarians, translators and bus operators, the kind of event that smelled like coffee and photocopy toner. Mia said yes without checking the fee. She wrote the talk over 2 Sundays, between watering the plant and resetting the lamp's dimmer, and titled it Defaults Hold Weight. She began with a story about a boy whose library card printed in 2 minutes, and the permission it gave him to title his own afternoon. After she spoke, a woman with silver hair and a name badge that read Director, Federal Service Design, waited politely by the edge of the crowd. "We're updating our digital service standards," she said. "Your patterns read like a spine. Would you help us put care in the bones?" Mia felt the world tilt, the way maps sometimes rotate into a more accurate north. She said yes, with conditions already living in her hands, no panels that turn pain into policy theater, a table with receptionists and caseworkers, attribution durable enough to survive administrations. The director said, "Of course," and sounded like someone who knew how to keep a promise without applause. At home, Mia folded the invitation into the notebook under keys and wrote a sentence in the margin, "Scale without forgetting the room." She rang the brass bell once and texted Amara, "We're going to Washington with verbs." Amara replied, "I'll pack the checklists and snacks." Travel returned to Mia's life by the door she chose. She rode trains when she could, because trains forgive thinking. She stayed in cheap, quiet hotels near libraries. She ate with colleagues who wanted to talk shop and then stop. She took long walks in new cities to measure their light and their generosity to feet. She learned that some places apologize for their weather and others let it be. She found she preferred the latter. In Washington, the service design standards meetings were held in a bland building that smelled like recycled air and ambition. Mia arrived with Amara and a stack of printed patterns bound with a bulldog clip. Around the table sat 2 policy leads wearing the weak in their faces. A receptionist from a veterans hospital with hands that had held too many pens. A translator who wanted buttons to leave room for other languages. And a lawyer whose eyebrows were against them until they weren't. They began, as Aurora always began, with a story from a person who had to use a thing in a bad moment. A widow described trying to report a death while the form fought her like a petty god. "I kept thinking, I don't have time to survive your website too," she said. The room went quieter than it had planned. Mia slid grief mode across the table. "No hard gates. Save automatically. Ask less." The lawyer frowned. The translator nodded. The receptionist exhaled. "This," the receptionist said, tapping the paper with a finger that had stamped 1,000 dates. "This would have let me be a person and not a rule for 5 minutes. For 3 days, they moved verbs across paper like pieces on a board. Cancel became go back. Submit became send when humans were on the other end. Skip for now appeared like a small, important mercy. Show me why you need this became a link under fields that felt like surveillance. The lawyer fought for logs. Mia fought for pauses. The receptionist fought for people who would sit at counters and explain the changes to faces. By the end, the draft standards included a new section called Defaults of Care, and the footnotes named the committee members alphabetically, including Rosa Delgado, housing clerk. Mia took a picture of the page and sent it to Rosa, who texted back a photo of empanadas. For when you're home. On the fourth day, a man in a suit Mia recognized from screens stepped into the room, shook no hands and said, "Good sentiments. What about speed?" Mia had learned to hear that question as a confession. "I don't know how to count what isn't a number yet." She answered evenly. "We've measured drop-off, error rates, and time to complete. Defaults of care reduce all three. Also, we're not choosing between speed and dignity. We're designing them to be the same thing," the translator added. "And my team will save time not inventing kindness every Tuesday." The man nodded as if consenting to gravity and left. The room laughed when the door shut, not unkindly, just relieved. The standards would take months to ratify. That's what standards do when the stakes are real. Mia returned home with travel dust in her shoes and the feeling that the map of her work had added a square. She put the bulldog-clipped stack on the shelf between Rise and a library book about signage, brewed tea, and fed tempo. She wrote Chapter 9, standards in the notebook, and underlined it, the lines straight as a boundary, gentle as a hand. Meanwhile, life practiced being life. The retired music teacher from 8 broke her wrist slipping on Winter's vanity and refused to stop her Wednesday lobby lessons. "You can't play scales with a broom," she said, balancing pride and stubbornness in one cast. Mia visited with flowers and a step stool. They moved the keyboard to a better height. "Standards," the teacher said, chuckling. "We're all writing them." Evan, the journalist who wrote about verbs, sent a link to a piece about the receptionists' committee that had been translated into 3 languages. "It's traveling," he wrote. "The right way." He asked if he could stop by the studio to see the bell. He did, and then he set his recorder down and asked no questions for 20 minutes. They watched afternoon light find the lip of the lamp. "Sometimes you report an absence," he said. "The absence of spectacle, and how much work it takes to keep it absent." Mia nodded, grateful for a sentence that understood rooms. A note arrived from Sienna, postmarked from another coast. "I'm okay. I run a small studio now, too. We help shelters write intake that doesn't steal breath. Thank you for meeting my eyes in that lobby. It changed the way I look at my own." Mia pressed the paper flat with a palm and let her chest ache the good ache. She wrote back, "We're all allowed to become source material for our better selves." That same week, a letter embossed with Adrian's company seal arrived, addressed to Aurora Studio with a familiar flourish. Mia held it under light as if heat might reveal invisible ink. Inside, a sincere apology on expensive paper that tried to perform humility. It named no acts and admitted no harm. It praised her resilience, the way people praise survivors when they won't hold perpetrators. She placed it in receipts and then, after a breath, moved it to compost, a folder she had started for things that would, given time, turn into soil for something that could actually live. The year unfolded with the rhythm of a good metronome, meetings that started on time and ended on purpose, emails that sounded like people, invoices sent and paid in 10 days, the bell rung for process wins that would never trend. Mia took a week in July to read near a lake with bad cell service. She brought the lamp's warm memory and a pair of shoes that accepted dirt. She returned with patience replenished and a stubborn tan. The studio did not burn without her. That was a win, too. In September, the museum invited Aurora to host a day of workshops in the gallery. Children had been pressing the go-back button all summer and slowing cartoon heart rates. The curators wanted them to meet the human who loved verbs that much. Mia designed a workshop called Make a Form That Loves You Back. She opened with index cards and asked the kids to tell the form something it could do to help them. Let me draw my name. Let me save without asking. Let me pick later. Let me tell you no. They built paper interfaces with stickers. A boy asked if he could teach his principal to change the cafeteria pre-order system. You can, Mia said. Will you? He nodded hard. I like your verbs, she told him. I like your verbs, he told her back, in a voice that might one day carry a room. Kemi visited from the hospital with a handful of nurses and a list of 6 small problems that felt big at 2 a.m. The error that forced a re-login after a crash, the modal that threatened to delete notes, the unclear icon that looked like a trash can. Aurora hosted a night shift audit at 5 in the afternoon, the room's light set to hospital dusk. They fixed what they could in an hour and wrote tickets with urgency that honored sleep. We don't solve everything, Mia said as the nurses left with bags under their eyes and jokes still working. We solve the tonight that someone has to live. The bell rang softly as if it were wearing scrubs. Washington called again in late fall. The defaults of care section had survived 4 committees and 3 rewrites. It would be adopted into the Federal Digital Service Standards. The director sent a PDF where the footnotes still named receptionists. She wrote, "You asked for durability." We welded it in. Mia printed the page and taped it behind the lamp where her eye would catch it when she tired of alleys and angles. The national announcement created a gust of old weather. Think pieces. Talk shows, a panel Mia declined twice. A prominent pundit called the standards paternalistic. A receptionist with a Twitter account replied, "I am not your child. I am your front line." I asked for this. The thread outpaced the pundit in 6 hours because the internet sometimes remembers it is made of people. Mia watched the exchange and didn't add a word. She opened Patterns of Care and approved a pull request titled Ask Once for Pronouns, Then Remember. At home, the porch light ritual changed hands. Her parents downsized to a small apartment near a park where the walking path remembered their feet. Mia mounted a new light for them and set it on a timer. Even rituals get to rest, her father said, handing her a screwdriver like a scepter. That's how they last. Toward winter, Lila brought news to the studio wrapped in parchment and delight. My paper got funded, she said, brandishing a grant letter for a series on small systems, large mercies. First profile, a receptionist committee that changed federal standards. Mia clapped and pretended to boo. There goes the quiet, she teased. Lila grinned. We will write it quietly. The last weeks of the year bent toward summarizing, as weeks do. Amara printed the keep change ritual sheets and set 2 pens on the floor beside tea. They kept Fridays, office hours, reading, health admin, the bell, the fellowship, the repository, the rule about meetings ending on time. They changed the pro bono budget more, the translation budget more, and the threshold for saying yes to opportunities higher. At the bottom of Keep, Mia wrote, Trust rooms over stages. Amara underlined it, then added, Protect verbs. On the final evening before their break, Mia left the studio late and walked the long way home. The city wore winter well, steam rising from grates, windows performing warmth, the smell of soup cubes and new sweaters. She passed the Union Hall, where Rosa had introduced her, and the library, where a boy's temporary card had printed like permission. The museum lights glowed at the corner. Inside, a child pressed go back and watched a cartoon heart steadied by a button. She reached her building and found the retired music teacher seated in the lobby, wrist healed, broom set aside. A small crowd of kids around the keyboard. They were playing a scale that sounded like a neighborhood learning itself. Wider circles, the teacher said when Mia paused. That's all this is. Upstairs, Mia placed the notebook on the desk, the pen on the right, the plant on the left. She wrote the title, Chapter 10, Wider Circles, and let her breath catch up with the ink. She wrote a paragraph that felt like a promise she could keep. We remain small on purpose. We grow what travels without us. We ring the bell for process, not press. We tape our sentences where our hands can see them. We refuse to scale harm. We standardize help. She read it once, then twice, then closed the notebook, as if closing a door that would open again in the morning to the same room and a slightly better light. Before bed, she stood at the window and watched the city breathe, forgetting and remembering, breaking and mending, demanding and singing. She thought of the ladder on her parents' porch, of screws and standards, of bulbs that tire and hands that keep them burning. She thought of a kiss in a stadium and how an angle once tried to claim her story. She thought of the rooms she had built to make sure angles weren't the author. She thought of keys. She turned off the lamp. The studio held the dark kindly. Tomorrow would arrive by the route it preferred. Quiet, on time, with enough light to read by. Mia would unlock the door with the keys she carried, step into the room she made, and begin again with verbs. Wider circles would widen by the diameter of one decision, then another. No trumpets. A bell, maybe. Small, clear enough. By the time the leaves crisped into their annual honesty, Mia could walk from her apartment to the studio with her eyes half closed and still arrive at the door without fumbling the keys. Habit had grown into muscle. The brass bell waited with the patience of a ritual that didn't need applause. She unlocked the room, set the pen on the right, the plant on the left, and breathed the particular smell of paper and electricity. "Begin," she said. The room agreed. The map on the wall had changed. Not bigger, truer. Lines connected Aurora Studio to places that didn't know each other but behaved like cousins. A city library that had learned to print permission in 2 minutes. A clinic where go back had become a small act of mercy. A brand that now measured success in fewer apologies. A federal standards page that named receptionists in its footnotes. The arrows were not ownership. They were influence. Mia had started to think of them as continuities, places where care didn't reset to zero when the context changed. Continuity made her think of home, the first map anyone learns to read. She hadn't been back to her old neighborhood in months. Not out of avoidance, out of momentum. On Saturday, she put the notebook in her bag like a passport and rode a bus that still coughed at the same intersections. The street smelled the way memory insists it should. Bread at 4, detergent at 6, late oranges around the corner at 7. Her parents had downsized nearby, but this was the original grid. The one her feet measured before she learned jobs had elevators. The library, the one where her mother had taught her that reading is a kind of travel, was smaller than the branch she lived near now. It looked the same size as always from the outside, because childhood refuses to adjust for scale. Inside, the desk was scuffed, the carpet politely tired. The librarian who had stamped her first card still worked Saturdays. Hair silver now, glasses connected to a chain that looked like an old promise. When Mia stepped up, the woman squinted, then smiled. "Mia Langford," she said, as if reading a favorite sentence. "We still have your overdue fee from 2007, don't worry." "It's been forgiven by time," they laughed. Mia pointed at the terminal. "Do you still lose people at question 3? "Not since your friends updated the system," the librarian said, pride modest and real. "We switched to the new flow last month. I didn't know your name was involved until a patron showed me an article and said, 'Look, this is how we got through faster.'" The woman lowered her voice. "We had a boy yesterday. 2 minutes to a temporary card. He sat down like someone had opened a window in his chest. Mia swallowed around the sudden ache. That's the metric, she said. Windows in chests. She spent an hour putting books in the wrong order on purpose, and then back in the right order, because order is a kindness too. When she left, she looked up at the narrow strip of sky between buildings and thought, continuity is a room that follows you. On the bus home, she wrote in the notebook, bring patterns to where you learned the alphabet. Under it a smaller line, teach here, back at Aurora. Amara had arranged the week in a grid that calmed the eyes. Office hours Tuesday, a co-op critique Wednesday, a call with Washington, standards revision, Thursday, fellowship Saturday. On Friday afternoon, between health admin and reading hour, Rosa arrived with a folder and empanadas, and the look of someone about to ask for something worth doing. We want to pilot an exit without penalty program for housing, Rosa said, setting the folder down like care. When a tenant has to leave before a lease ends because staying is unsafe, we make them climb a wall of forms that punishes them for breathing. I want the default to be we'll help you land, not prove you deserve to land. Mia felt the room tilt toward a good difficulty. We'll start with verbs, she said. They pulled the wallpaper taut, sketched steps with tape, wrote pause, call later, trusted contact in clear hand. They called a shelter. They listened more than they talked. When the first draft stood there, taped and hopeful, Rosa touched a post-it that said, we'll call you back at a time you choose, and said, I want to staple this to my department's forehead. Amara rang the bell. Not loud, once. Enough. Homecoming wasn't only streets and libraries. It was calling back versions of yourself you had left folded in drawers. Leela, grant-funded and fierce, had started her series on small systems, large mercies. The first piece traveled like a whisper that knew where to go. A receptionist committee had changed federal standards. The second profiled a school secretary, Miss Ada, who ran a free lunch form like a conductor of relief. I didn't change the budget, Miss Ada said into Lila's recorder. I changed the words. Mia read the line twice and taped it under practices that keep me. Words are budgets too. Aurora's fellowship met on Saturdays. The third cohort had learned to build without performance. On week 5, Mia surprised them. Field trip, she said, and took them on a bus to her childhood library. They used the card machines like tourists, and then sat in a circle in the children's section, among chairs that had watched dozens of beginnings. Design came from here, Mia said, tapping a picture book's thick spine. Not the software, the listening. A student asked how to keep listening when deadlines roar. We make the roar the signal, Mia answered. When it gets loud, we slow down. That afternoon, Mia stayed behind after the students left. A teenager hovered near the stacks like a moth, deciding on a lamp. You're the lady from the museum who made the heart slow down, he said quietly. My little brother pressed the button 8 times. Mia smiled. Did his heart slow each time? Yeah, the boy said, then frowned. But school still makes it go fast. What would help? She asked. If the form for extra time didn't make you say the worst story about yourself, he said. If it didn't make you relive it every semester. Mia wrote it down. I can't promise, she said, but I can promise we'll put that sentence in a room where choices live. Continuity meant repeating the right things. Every Monday, Amara started with health admin. They booked dentist and eye appointments because health is work. They paid contractors in 10 days because dignity is a clock. They blocked Friday because rest is a battery. They rang the bell for process wins, never for press. They printed the scale tests and taped them inside their eyelids. Easier for receptionists, lower heart rate. People home on time. The global brand tried to widen their contract again. We could move faster if you doubled headcount. Mia didn't say no to growth. She said no to speed without breath. "We'll grow by 2 human beings," she said, "and not all at once." One of the 2 was obvious. Kemi, ready to return a day a week from the hospital with stories that kept the room honest. The second was Jonas, a soft-spoken accessibility engineer who treated screen readers like first-class citizens and had a laugh that sounded like a new standard getting ratified. "We're small," Mia told them both. "We intend to remain audible to each other." They said yes, like people accepting a key. The room adjusted without losing its echo. Jonas taught the fellowship to read their prototypes out loud, with their eyes closed. Kemi designed a lunchtime exercise called Hard Days, where everyone wrote the worst possible scenario for a button, and then removed it. Amara rewrote the onboarding doc, so it began with how to ask for help, and what we do when life is bigger than the calendar. Mia changed nothing fundamental, which is the hardest change to make. Washington called with a revision request that smelled like compromise. "Some agencies want to make grief mode optional," the director said, weary but steady. "Pilot only." Mia felt her body gather at the word optional the way a throat gathers around a bone. "Grief is not an edge case," she said. "It is a human inevitability. We don't pilot inevitability." Silence, then the sort of exhale that means agreement found its shoes. "I'll fight it," the director said. "We'll keep it standard." A month later, the city piloted exit without penalty. The lobby, where tenants used to stall, developed a new sound. The small click of pens, signing forms that didn't punish survival. Rosa texted a photo of a printed notice on the wall. "If you are unsafe, tell us how to help you leave." Below it in smaller text, "We believe you." Mia pressed her palm to the wall of the studio and thought of how many hands had pressed other walls without being believed. Homecoming also meant people who had been part of the hardest chapter appearing in new frames. Sienna sent a photo of a shelter's new intake page with the line, "We will not ask you to prove your pain," in plain language. "We stole your pattern and left your credit bigger than legal," she wrote. "Sue me." Mia laughed, then cried, then replied, "I'll sue you for more of that sentence in more rooms." There were setbacks because continuity isn't a straight line. The brand piloted a new flow in a region without running it through scale tests. Complaints rose. A nurse wrote, "I started apologizing again." Mia and Amara convened an emergency room. No blame, just verbs. They rolled back the change in 2 days and wrote a clause into the contract titled, "No apologies without recourse." The VP signed it with relief. "We forgot to hear the breathing," she said. "Thank you for ringing the bell." Lila's series reached a classroom where a teacher asked students to audit the verbs of their school's forms. They returned with wild energy and a list that made the principal blush. The cafeteria pre-order changed, cancel to change, submit to save allergies. To tell us what hurts. The school nurse reported fewer panicked hallway stops. The student council wrote, "Defaults hold weight" on a poster and taped it above the front desk. When Mia visited, the students treated her like an aunt who brought good paper. In late spring, the mayor's office asked Aurora to host a community standards day in the Union Hall. The room filled with clerks, receptionists, caseworkers, bus drivers, librarians, a handful of designers, and one lawyer whose eyebrows started skeptical and ended neutral. They broke into circles and did verb audits with real screens. People wrote on post-its like future policy, pause without losing place, call me later, explain before ask, trusted contact. Rosa stood at the front and said, "If your form cannot imagine the person who is afraid, start over." The room clapped like a potluck, warm and unself-conscious. In the middle of that day, an elderly man approached Mia with a folded paper. His hands shook the way decades shake them. "I wanted to show you what my wife filled out last year," he said, "before she died. It was like lifting a heavy thing when my arms were already tired." He unfolded the paper. The form was all caps and demands. He put it next to a printout of the new grief flow. White space, go back, save for later. "This one," he said, tapping the newer page. "Let me sit with her and just be with her." He took Mia's hand with a gentle accuracy learned over years. "Thank you for not making me a clerk on the day I was a husband." Mia couldn't speak. She squeezed his hand and rang the bell in her head. Summer arrived like a kindness. The plant asked for a bigger pot again. Tempo grew into something that could be trusted with a window's edge. The fellowship graduated 8 more practitioners of care. Kemi's hospital promoted her to lead the portal redesign. Jonas shipped a pattern called slow confirmation that stopped people from tapping themselves into errors. Amara instituted a studio rule called Enough O'Clock, the hour each day when everyone had to say out loud that the work they had done was enough for that day. It sounded goofy the first week. By the third, people meant it. The national standards finally published with defaults of care intact. The PDF sat on a .gov server and looked unremarkable, which was the point. Laws rarely look like rescue. They look like paragraphs. Yet in 1,000 rooms, clerks printed the page and taped it near screens. In 100 meetings, someone said, "The standard says go back," and the room didn't argue, because arguing with the standard is work. In dozens of homes, people noticed nothing at all, which is how relief often arrives. Zia took a train to her parents' new apartment with groceries and a stubborn cake. They ate in a kitchen that knew their laughter. Her father showed her a hinge that no longer stuck. Her mother showed her a book that refused to be put down. "You look like someone who knows what tomorrow is for," her mother said. Mia thought about it. "For repeating the right things," she answered. Her father raised his mug. "Continuity," he said, as if toasting a quiet emperor. On the way back, Mia stopped at the old block and stood outside the first apartment she had shared with Adrian. No monuments, no ghosts, just a window with a plant in it that belonged to someone else. She didn't need to make peace. Peace had already moved in with her somewhere else. She took a breath, not to mark anything, but because air was free and present. Then she walked to the bus stop and went home, to the room where her name on the door was a sentence, not a claim. The year-end approached with its usual temptation to summarize. Aurora's keep change ritual took place on the floor, tea and pens, and the bell within reach. Keep Fridays office hours, Enough O'Clock Fellowship Repository, scale tests, pay in 10 days, health admin reading hour, exit without penalty, grief mode as standard, committees with receptionists at the table, change, a small stipend for clerks who joined policy meetings, a travel budget for Kemi to teach outside the city, an Ask Less award, one client a quarter recognized for removing fields in production. At the bottom of Keep, Mia wrote, "Trust the room over the stage." Amara underlined it and drew a tiny door. On the last night before break, Mia cleaned the desk with the affection of someone setting a table for a future meal. She placed the notebook in the drawer and left it slightly open, like a mouth about to tell a story. She turned off the lamp, listened to the city rehearse winter, and let the studio hold the dark kindly. Continuity, she realized as she locked the door, wasn't a loop. It was a spiral. You passed the same landmarks from a higher floor. Homecoming wasn't a return to origin. It was bringing what you had built back to where you learned to want it. Legacy wasn't an artifact. It was defaults that worked when no one thanked them. She walked into the hall with keys that no longer felt heavy. Tomorrow would arrive by its preferred route, quiet, on time, with enough light to read by. She would open the door and repeat the right things. The bell would ring once, Then the work would behave like water, finding the low places and filling them, not loudly, not slowly, but with patience that remembered every room it had ever made kinder. By late winter, the studio's ritual was so steady it felt like weather you could set your watch by. Mia unlocked the door, set the pen on the right, the plant on the left, turned the lamp to a kind light and checked the wall where the map of continuities kept adding quiet lines. She rang the brass bell once before work began, not for victory, just for presence, and wrote the date at the top of the page like a small contract. I will choose verbs. The inbox held invitations that sounded less like stages and more like rooms. A county health department wanted help applying dignity defaults to a prenatal program. A public defender's office asked for a simpler intake for families who didn't know the word arraignment and shouldn't need to. A university library requested a training on verbs for student workers who sat at the help desk and watched people learn to admit they were lost. None of the requests promised headlines. All of them promised work. Amara slid into the second chair, hair still wet from the walk, and set a stack of envelopes down beside the plant. 3 checks, 1 love letter, and a grant notice, she said. The grant is for translations. The love letter is from a receptionist in Idaho who taped the scale tests above. A cash register because she said every job is design when you're between a person and a system. Mia read the sentence twice and let it take a chair. Add it to proof, she said. And the fridge. They began the week with health admin because bodies do not care about calendars. They refilled prescriptions, scheduled a dental cleaning, ticked off the small tasks that keep a human from being ambushed by maintenance. Then office hours, 40 minutes of untangling 2 clients' knotted timelines. Amara treated time like yarn, patient, unpanicked. Jonas joined on video from his kitchen and turned 3 accessibility questions into decisions with the ease of a person who respects edges. Kemi sent a photo from the hospital hallway, a nurse giving a thumbs up beside a screen where Go-Back had replaced Cancel like a tiny revolution that forgot to brag. At noon, Rudza arrived with empanadas and a folder labeled Exit Without Penalty. Month 2. They sat on the floor because sitting on the floor makes even policy feel human. Complaints are down, Rosa said. But there's a break in the flow on step 4. We ask them to choose a time for a callback, and then we call it the wrong time because the field speaks a different language to the system. She thumped the folder as if it were a stubborn door. We are teaching a computer to respect afternoon naps. Jonas laughed. We can make the field speak human, he said. We'll force the format and refuse to apologize. He sketched a fix with a pencil. Because even engineers know a pencil can outpace a keyboard when the problem is about tone. In the afternoon, Mia drafted a training for student workers called Welcoming Loss, how to greet a person's confusion without performing competence over them. She wrote examples of first sentences that hold weight. Tell me what you're trying to do, and I'll walk next to you. You're not late. The system is. We can go back without losing our place. She imagined her teenage self circling the desk, pretending not to need help, and wrote the sentence that would have changed the day. I'll stand on your side of the counter. She underlined it twice. When the day ended, enough o'clock arrived, with its usual mixture of relief and disbelief. They said out loud what they had finished. Emails, decisions, 6 sentences that would save 20 minutes for someone who needed them, and let the room agree. Mia placed the pen on the right, watered tempo, and watched evening lean across the brick like a patient hand. Spring began as a rumor the city wanted to believe. Mia took the train to a county an hour away where the health department had rented a church basement for the prenatal redesign. Folding chairs, coffee-like endurance, a whiteboard that refused to erase fully, perfect conditions. Round the table, a midwife who spoke softly and made the room hush to hear her. 2 caseworkers, a translator who had strong opinions about English pretending to be universal, and 3 mothers in their 3rd trimester who had agreed to be paid for their time and paid attention to for once. They began with maps drawn in marker. "Where does the process hurt?" Mia asked. The mothers circled proof of address with a shaky oval. "I moved twice," one said. "I had to keep proving I live where I can afford to live." They circled employment verification. "I'm between jobs," another said. "That's why I need you." They circled partner info. "He doesn't live with me anymore," the third said. "He comes and goes. I come and stay." Mia slid Ask Less across the table and made a small ceremony of crossing out fields with a red pen. The midwife cried openly and did not apologize. By lunch, proof of address had become where we can reach you. Employment had become how are you providing for yourself right now. Partner info had turned into who else should we know about to help you best. The translator tested each sentence in 2 languages and nodded when the words survived translation without cruelty. The county director peered in after the break and asked the question Speed always asks when it arrives late. "Will this slow us down?" Mia gestured to the map to the mothers. "It will keep you from stopping," she said. "An hour saved by denying care is an hour you will pay later in crisis. This way, we pay in listening up front." The director looked at the midwife's face, at the mothers' bodies, at the whiteboard covered in verbs and said, "Fine, we'll pay in listening." Back on the train, Mia felt something settle, not triumph. Not relief exactly, but a new bone knitting. She wrote in the notebook, "We can make listening a line item." Her hand shook a little from the coffee and the adrenaline of rooms that choose to behave. That month, the global brand sent an email with a subject line Mia had learned to trust. Small win. Inside, a 3-line note from a patient who finally finished a flow without making their kids late for school. "Thank you for not punishing me for needing to be a parent at 7:30 a.m. There was a screenshot of save and return, circled in green. Mia forwarded it to the team with 3 words. "This is payroll." The museum invited Aurora back, not for an exhibit this time, but for a day where visitors could bring a form from their real life and sit with a designer to make it tolerable. Mia named the event Bring Your Bureaucracy and showed up with a box of pens, 2 rolls of tape, and a sign that read, "We will not make you cry." People arrived holding paper like it might bite, hospital bills, school forms, housing notices, tax letters that spoke fluent threat. They sat, they breathed, they rewrote. The museum cafe ran out of napkins because people kept using them as scratch paper. A security guard brought more napkins and cried behind his hand when an elderly woman changed spouse to partner and said, 59 years, and they still pretend there's only one word. Mia watched a teenager help his grandmother find the courage to check "I need help" calling in giant letters. She watched a librarian from another city smuggle patterns into her backpack the way people smuggle loaves. She watched a bus driver in a reflective vest show her how the ticket machine forced him into errors by timing out too fast. "It punishes me for helping," he said. They wrote help mode in a box, underlined it, and promised to send it to transit. The bell rang in her head again and again, quietly enough, when the federal defaults of care standards finally went public, with the receptionist committee in the footnotes like a line of names under a painting. Washington. Sent a PDF that looked like nothing and was everything. The website didn't crash. No fireworks. Just a page that was already influencing rooms before it passed. Lila's story about the committee published the same day. It sounded like walking next to someone, not like shouting about them from across a street. Mia read it with gratitude that made her jaw ache and texted, "You kept the spectacle out." Lila replied, "They did the same for me." The announcement stirred some old weather. Think pieces with grand nouns. Pundits with opinions. A panel request Mia declined by sending a picture of the brass bell and the sentence, "We ring this for process." The TV show never wrote back. Sienna mailed a postcard with a drawing of a shelter door on it and the words, "Leave without proving" in her handwriting. On the back she wrote, "We used your pattern. A woman left in an hour. We sent a driver. She brought her plants." Mia left the postcard by the lamp for a week, then filed it in proof. Some proof looks like a government page. Some proof looks like a plant that didn't die because a woman didn't have to argue to carry it. One Thursday, between a co-op critique and reading hour, a young man knocked on the studio door with a nervous smile. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "I'm from the Girls' Design Club. I was there the day you taught verb audit. I got into a city fellowship. They want to fix a permit form, and I wanted to say, you were the first person who showed me a button could be mercy." Mia stood, because the body knows when to meet a sentence halfway. "What's your name?" she asked. "Diego," he said, eyes bright with the beginning. She shook his hand like a colleague, not a fan. "You'll build rooms I won't enter," she said. "Good." She handed him a printed sheet she kept for luck. Patterns of care. First 10. Go back, save and return. Explain before ask. Pause without penalty. Tell me once, trusted contact. Quiet mode, show me why. I don't know yet. Exit without penalty. Tape this somewhere you can't ignore, she said. Let it tape you to yourself. After he left, Amara said, he looked like a person who will change the world by rearranging lines. Mia smiled. That's the only way the world changes and stays changed, she said. Lines first, then laws follow. Summer arrived with heat that made sidewalks opinionated. The plant by the window began to angle toward morning again, a geometry Mia admired. She and Amara closed the studio for a week and took the train to a small town where the library still stamped cards by hand. They rented a room above a bakery and wrote the first draft of a slim book. Defaults hold weight. Half patterns, half stories. No anecdotes stolen from pain. Just rooms described well enough to build elsewhere. Gemi contributed a chapter called Nurses Teach Us Time. Jonas wrote a section titled Respect the Reader about alt text written like you cared whether someone got the joke. Rosa wrote a foreword that made Mia cry at the breakfast table. We didn't need heroes, Rosa wrote. We needed standards with our names on them. They designed the book like a tool you'd keep near a kettle. Water-wipeable cover, margins that welcomed notes, type large enough for tired eyes. They released it under a license that made it easy to copy. No tour, no stage. Libraries first, then clinics, then city halls that asked for a box of 10 for the break room. The museum placed it in the gift shop between a postcard of the subway map and a zine about public benches. Back in the city, the first storm of the season arrived like a rehearsal. The power flickered, the internet hiccuped, and the studio's light went out. They opened the blinds and kept working by day. Standards should work in a blackout, Jonas said, setting paper on the floor. Buttons should still mean what they mean when speechless. They laughed and wrote blackout mode on the wall, clear offline states. No data loss, phone numbers printed at the bottom for humans who still pick up. That night, Mia walked home under a sky that practiced theater. Thunder held back just enough to be dramatic. Rain decided to arrive all at once. On her block, 2 teenagers argued about whether to run or wait. She stood under a scaffolding and watched the water choose the low places, as it always does. Let the work behave like water, she thought. remembering the sentence from Part 9, and felt the rightness of repetition. Continuity is a sacrament you renew by doing it again. Autumn brought an email from the university where she had once felt like a guest. They wanted her to teach a short course, Care as a Design Constraint, to graduate students who had learned to prototype faster than they had learned to apologize. She accepted on one condition: half the seats would go to clerks, receptionists, and social workers. "They will be the oxygen," she wrote. The department chair blinked in bureaucratic rhythm and then agreed, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of wisdom disguised as fatigue. In class, a receptionist named Tasha corrected a young designer's sentence about edge cases. "Baby," Tasha said kindly, "you just called my whole morning an edge case." The room laughed as a way to admit a mistake and keep moving. Mia watched 20 brains calibrate in real time and wrote "invite correction" on the board like a prayer. On the last day, the class held a small ceremony. Everyone taped above their desks the sentence they had promised to keep for a year. A designer wrote "ask less." A clerk wrote "I am not your exception, I'm your user." Tasha wrote "tell me once." Mia wrote "we will not make you relive it." The room rang a tiny bell someone had brought from home. It sounded like a neighborhood learning itself. One evening in late fall, Mia walked by the Union Hall, where the Community Standards Day had changed a dozen forms forever, and saw a new flyer: quiet conference, a day of co-working. Clinics, no panels, no keynotes, only rooms. She texted Lila a photo. "We've infected the word conference," she wrote. Lila replied with a heart and a screenshot of her own story's closing line. "The miracle is not that a scandal became a platform. The miracle is that a woman chose to build a platform that doesn't need her on it to keep standing." Mia unlocked the studio the next morning and found a small package on the mat. No return address. Inside, a single brass key on a plain string and a note in an unfamiliar hand: "For the next room you will build, or the one someone else will. Keys travel." She held the key until her palm warmed it, then hung it on the wall next to Rise. The two pieces of metal, bell and key, looked like a grammar for the life she had chosen. Ring, then open. She sat. She placed the pen on the right, the plant on the left. She wrote at the top of a fresh page, Chapter 11, The Next Room. She did not know its walls yet. She knew the door would open from either side. Before she began, she added a line to Practices That Keep Me that felt like an instruction and a legacy at once. When you find a better default, make it easy for the next person to set it without needing to know your name. She underlined next person and felt the room agree. She rang the bell for no reason, or for all of them. The sound was small and clear and enough. Then she started writing the first sentence of the next room. In the quiet after the storm, there's a sound you start to recognize. It isn't applause. It isn't headlines. It's a single key turning in a door you built yourself. If today's chapter stayed with you, the small rooms, the steady verbs, the way a life can change by choosing kinder defaults. Carry one thing with you: transformation doesn't need a spotlight. It needs a habit. It needs a sentence you can keep. Some stories end with ladders climbed. Ours ends with doors opened. A woman who refused to fit inside someone else's paragraph now writes her own, patiently, precisely, with a grammar made of care. She doesn't need permission. She has keys. If this story gave you breath when the world felt loud, we'd love to walk the next one with you. Subscribe to her Rise Stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss tomorrow's chapter. There's a new room waiting, another woman rising, another life choosing verbs over spectacle. Before you go, leave us a note below. What small default of care would have changed a hard moment in your life? Maybe it's a go back instead of cancel. Maybe it's save and return, tell me once, or simply a human voice that says, You're not late, the system is. Your answer could be the lantern someone else needs. If the story resonated, tap the like button. It helps the next person find their way here. And if there's someone who needs a reminder that endings can become beginnings, share this episode with them. This is Her Rise Stories, where resilience is ordinary, kindness is rigorous, and second chances are designed on purpose. Thank you for spending your time, your attention, and your courage with us. See you in the next story tomorrow.